The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Prophet's Way, A Guide to Living in the Now, which is largely my autobiography, essentially, a spiritual autobiography. This is from page 68, the chapter Changing the World by Changing Ourselves. The summer I lived in a teepee, I thought a great deal about the monastic experience. I'd read Dark Night of the Soul by St. John of the Cross and several books by Thomas Merton, and throughout my life had been drawn to the idea of solitude as a way of speeding up spiritual experience and growth. And that had certainly been my experience in my semi-monastic summer. I received knowledge and insights that I doubt I could have gotten any other way. Before I went into the forest and lived in that teepee, I'd always considered the monastic experience to be both intensely personal and intensely selfish. A monk, I thought, was a person working on himself and only affecting him or herself. But that summer, I realized that my spiritual practice was having an effect on the world. I could feel it. It was as if the world itself had a particular vibration made up of the buzz of all the life upon and within it. And when I was peaceful, it made the world a bit more peaceful. When I was agitated, the world became more agitated. My conclusion from this admittedly subjective experience was that I really was affecting the world, that monks are spiritual warriors, and that monasteries are places from which powerful beams of positive spiritual energy fan out from the men and women in them to transform and help the world. While not so common among the writings of contemporary monks, this view was clearly held by those people who chose the monastic life in the centuries and millennia preceding the last 100 years or so. And so I worked at making myself more pure so I could add purity to the world. But throughout this, there was also part of me that thought that this was a subjective experience, perhaps with no objective reality. It seemed on that level that it wasn't possible that I could be so closely connected to the world, that I could have any significant impact on it just by my state of being at any particular moment or throughout my life. Because it was me experiencing the world, then, of course, the world would change as I changed. My point of view is shifting or being contaminated by my own mental state at the moment. This assumption was the result of my training in science. Science is something unique to those cultures who were influenced by the Greeks or the Persians. In India, Chinese, and Native American cultures, there is no equivalent. They have philosophy and spirituality, which integrate what we call science with what we call mysticism. But in their classic traditions, they don't have what we would refer to as pure science. Two of the primary tenets of science are the things that things are ultimately divisible into tiny, definable building blocks, and then for there to be a true reality, the observer must be separate from the observed. In our dreams, we're both observer and observed. It's unreal. In daily life, we're the observer, and the things around us, separate from us, are the observed. So we think of them as real. In this worldview, the entire universe can be separated into pieces, the first and primary division being that of observer and observed, subjective and objective. Science believed, and Aristotle and Descartes and others taught, that if the subjective observer could rid himself of his personal and instrumentational subjectivity and identify all the relevant factors, then a truly objective truth about the world and reality could be seen, measured, and determined. This belief, accepted as an absolute truth and the underpinning of our modern culture, led to viewing humankind as separate from the natural world. The classic question, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody there to hear it as a sound made, assumes that nobody there to hear it means a human. Only humans, so the story went, were capable of classifying and separating things, breaking them into pieces, as Aristotle taught us, and understanding their separate meanings. Only humans would recognize sound as sound. But as science divided matter into smaller and smaller pieces, a disturbing trend began to emerge. It was found that supposedly inanimate matter seemed to be affected by the act of observing. The first response to this was Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, which stated that things were constantly in a state of flux. And so if anything were observed at any moment, by the time the observation itself was made, things had already changed. Therefore, it was impossible to ever truly and absolutely observe anything. Because by the time we'd registered the observation, by the time the photons of light had hit the retina of our eye, the thing we were observing had already changed. It was also noted that the act of observing was not purely passive. With an electron microscope, for example, electrons are bounced off of or passed through things to produce an image for viewing. Similarly, a conventional microscope only works when photons of light bounce off the specimen and into your eye. Light and electrons are bits of matter or energy that could have a demonstrable effect on the things being observed, further increasing the certainty of the accuracy of the observation. Heisenberg went so far as to say that the exact location of anything in time and space could never be known, regardless of method or instrumentation. So it seemed we really couldn't know anything as an absolute and real state. All we could do is engineering, working with things because they work, like electricity, even though we don't know how or why they work, which is in fact the case with electricity. This allows us to manipulate the world around us, to build machines and make things work, but it also leads to the dangerous assumption that to be able to use something is to know it. This is mirrored in human nature, too. We're constantly affected by our experience of life, and our experiences change our personality, our worldview, and our behaviors. And I'm not now the person I was before I met Herr Mueller, nor am I now the same person I was even a week ago or even 1 minute ago. We grow, change, and are constantly in a state of flux, and this provides us with an opportunity to develop the spiritual sides of ourselves, and by doing this, to make the entire planet more spiritual. So this aspect of the scientific approach turned out to be wrong. It was, in fact, not possible to separate the observer from the observed. The book is The Prophet's Way.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you. Whew. Boy, what a hell of a weekend. We are going to talk about many and all dimensions of what happened over the weekend. On the line with us right now is Mark Potok. He is for 20 years, he was the guy who led the Southern Poverty Law Center in exposing hate groups, right-wing terrorism, the rapidly increasing infiltration of extremist ideas into the political mainstream. He's now Mark, welcome back to the program, first of all.
Well, thanks for having me again, Tom. I appreciate it.
It's always great to have you with us. You are no longer with SPLC?
Yeah, that's right. I left in March and have been beginning to pull together some other projects, principally a book I'm thinking of writing in the next year or two.
That's great.
Essentially about the rise of the radical right in the United States.
Yeah, I wish you the very best on that. But you are, one of the leading experts on this whole issue. There's a couple things here that I'd like to just kind of put on the table and let you riff on. I wrote an op-ed on this over the weekend that I believe Alternet will be publishing later on today, in which I point out that basically the whole Republican strategy of reaching out to white racists, as everybody knows, started with Nixon with the Southern strategy, and then Reagan and the whole Lee Atwater thing, and speaking in Philadelphia, Mississippi, et cetera. But that the reason that there's behind this, you've got this group of basically billionaires and polluting companies that now own the Republican Party. And they don't give a rat's ass about racism. They don't care about bigotry. They don't care about abortion rights. They don't care about women's health. They don't care whether people have health insurance or not. They just don't want to pay taxes, and they want to be deregulated. But they realize, as they fund this giant Republican machine that they have taken over with the help of the Supreme Court, they realize that they have to have the rubes. They have to have the voters. That there are people who really, abortion is more important to them. White supremacy is more important to them. Having their guns and making up for their little penises is more important to them than whether or not anybody has health care, or whether the air is clean, or whether the planet is melting down, or whatever. And so, the billionaires who fund the Republican Party are quite happy to tolerate the Republicans reaching out to these various fringe groups that the billionaires don't give a damn about, in order to get enough people to get themselves elected. number one. And number two, I'd love to hear your thoughts on why is it? I lived in Germany for a year, 1986, 87. I never saw a monument to a German general. The Nazis ran Germany for 11 years. The Confederates ran the southern part of the United States for 4 years. Why is it that Germany has no statues to Rommel and, et cetera, whereas you find Robert E. Lee all over the United States? What the hell is going on here? And then, feel free to pontificate on your thoughts of what happened over the weekend.
Well, yes, first of all, I agree that the sort of millionaire business interests behind the Republican Party don't care much about these issues at all until they start to impinge on their advertising, right? I mean, when their ads, seem to be getting them in bed with people making racist statements and so on. But outside of that, I think the interest is very, very thin. And, what we really see, it seems to me, happening to the Republicans is, the so-called party of Lincoln is now, courtesy of Donald Trump and some of his inner circle, really embracing this in an open way that's different than the way you're talking about the kind of business wing of the party embracing it. I think it's been obvious over the weekend as we listen to Trump's incredibly terrible statements on this. And I think for those sort of, the kind of moderate Republican pleas for Trump to say something, I think that is ridiculous, actually. And what I mean is this. I think that anything Donald Trump says about race and racism and white supremacy is an opportunistic lie, and we can simply assume that from the beginning, right? I mean, let's not forget where this guy came from and what he has done in the course of his presidency and the campaign before that. I think the thing is just, to me, infuriating. I mean, I think that people, Americans, should be demanding, if such thing is possible, not only that Trump get out there and say something, but that he actually do something. And that, to me, means throwing Steve Bannon out of the White House, throwing Sebastian Gorka out on the street, and doing the same with Stephen Miller, the three kind of principal exponents of this kind of open racism. And that's only a start. Obviously it's true about the Republican Party, and it's not only the history of the Southern strategy and later Reagan and so on, but, what's happened in the last few years, the incredible number of voter suppression measures. The newest thing we're seeing out there in the states with state after state, I think some 20 states now have legislation proposed this year that would limit protests in various ways.
Or legalize running over protesters.
Yeah, well, I mean, the legislation is aimed not at the white nationalists or groups like Vanguard America, but Black Lives Matter, anti-racist protesters, and so on.
And Dakota Access Pipeline.
I just think it's hard to express enough, anger with regard to Trump and his little gang. About Germany, yes. I know the German case really well. Spent a lot of time in Germany, have a lot of colleagues there in the anti-racist world. And, I think one thing that has to be said about Germany is that more than any other place I can think of, really, in history, the Germans as a society have really genuinely repudiated Nazism, National Socialism. That's not to say, obviously, there are things like the NPD and various small Nazi groupings, but they have really been repudiated by the society, and the absence of any kind of statues or memorials really reflects that. I mean, if you go to Berlin, what you see are memorials to victims of the Holocaust and things like that. Let me say one other thing about monuments in this country. I mean, in a way, the Robert E. Lee statue in Charlottesville is in a sense one of the most benign statues out there. I just like to say that there are some statues, some memorials, for instance, an obelisk in the city of Colfax, Louisiana, a small town in a very backward part of Louisiana, not far from Gina, as a matter of fact, which is a monument, literally, quote unquote, to white supremacy. It is a monument mourning the deaths of 3 white racists who participated in an early Reconstruction massacre of about 150 black people who were trying to defend their voting rights. So, that's what's really these monuments represent. And, for the incredibly disingenuous arguments from so-called moderates about, this is just history and you can't erase history, I just think that's unbelievably disingenuous. And, you brought up, I thought, rightly, the example of Germany is a completely different case.
Yeah. Here's Donald Trump, who has, going back to the 80s or 90s, whenever it was when the Central Park Five, these 5 young black and Hispanic men who were accused of raping this woman in the park and nearly beating her to death. And it turns out that when the DNA evidence came in, it was a serial killer, as I recall. It was a white guy who did it, and it was not any of these kids. And yet, even in the face of that evidence, Trump continued to stand behind his ad that he bought in the New York Times calling for the death penalty to be reinstated in New York State so it could be applied to these 5 young men of color. From that to, wondering out loud and basically turning it into an industry. If Barack Obama was, a secret Kenyan socialist, Muslim, whatever, to his anti-Muslim stuff, to his, it just goes on and on and on. It does not surprise me that Donald Trump refuses to call out the white racists. This, initially I was thinking this is his base, just like Nixon and Reagan. He is just exploiting these people. He thinks of them as rubes. Now I'm starting to think that he actually thinks of them as part of his family, that he identifies with them. What does, from your time at the Southern Poverty Law Center and the work you're doing right now, we're talking with Mark Potok, by the way, the former leader of the Southern Poverty Law Center, his website, markpotok, POTOK.net. What are your thoughts on, who is our commander-in-chief?
I think he's an unvarnished racist. Let's remember one of the things that I think is not mentioned when various people recite the litany of his racism too often is the fact that throughout his campaign he repeatedly encouraged thuggish street violence against black protesters at his rallies, right? Again and again and again. When that young black man was sucker punched, I think he's maybe in Mobile, famous video shot. The local sheriff described the man as a complete coward and so on. And Donald Trump, on the other hand, offered to fund the man's defense. So, it's not only these, relatively abstract things like his birtherism and so on, but it is, actually inciting violence against black people.
What do we do about this, Mark? We have about a minute and a half here before we're going to hit a break.
I don't know what we're going to do about it. It is incredibly disheartening to see what I think is still a pretty weak reaction from so-called moderates out there against the Republican Party and against Trump. What to me is sort of doubly enraging is to hear Sebastian Gorka, the supposed terror expert of Donald Trump, describing, among other things, the recent bombing of a Minneapolis mosque as a fake hate crime, suggesting initially that this could have been an attack by the left and so on. He actually just a few days ago said there has never been a serious attack unconnected to ISIS or Al-Qaeda. And as you know and I know, it's a complete and utter lie.
Right. Now,
it's being swallowed.
I've read that Gorka was a member of a Nazi group in what was it, Hungary?
Yes, he has ties. I don't know about a member.
Yeah.
And the group, yeah.
They're claiming him.
Seen as a neo-Nazi organization. He got some kind of medal that looks rather like a Nazi emblem from these people.
Remarkable. So maybe for the moment, the best disinfectant is sunlight?
Yeah, I think so. I think there has to be. I'm glad to see people like the mayor in Charlottesville taking such an active stance. And I'm glad to see that some people are using this to discuss the racism of the Republican Party or the racism that it employs repeatedly.
Mark, we're out of time. Mark Potok, thanks so much for being with us, Mark.
A real pleasure, Tom. Thanks.
Good talking with you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Michael, watching Free Speech TV in Imperial Beach, California. Hey, Michael, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Mr. Hartmann, about this weekend, Trump has lit the match, and the torches are going to burn. And Breitbart, and so my question is can this actually get out of control?
Or has it already? Or
Exactly.
are you talking about, are we heading for a new civil war?
Well, again, man, that's not going to happen. I mean, because the military owns the North and the South. So do you actually see a time where the South and the North go to war again?
Yeah. I don't see it, playing out that way, because the regional differences are diminished and have been over the years. And in fact, you find, now you've got, people like Scott Walker running Wisconsin, along these and disenfranchising black voters in Milwaukee. It's aggressively doing so. But it strikes me that it's time for us to say, the friggin' war is over. The Civil War, it ran for 4 years. Those traitors had 4 years. And it's time to consign them to the dust heaps of history and put them in the history books along with Rommel and I don't know any other German generals, but and friends, and just move forward.
Okay, I got you on that one, but again, this is, when a dude drives a car into a crowd, he's from Ohio.
Right. A technique, by the way, that ISIS is encouraging people to use and has perfected. Michael, I got to move along, but thank you. Your points are well taken. Lori in River Pines, California. Hey, Lori, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I was present for a Nazi rally in Sacramento about a year ago in June. And seeing what happened in Charlottesville, which was, of course, many, many times worse, I noticed parallels with the strange behavior of the law enforcement people. There was a legal observer on TV in Charlottesville just expressing amazement that the police were standing by and watching people hurt each other. The same thing happened in Sacramento, and it was just strange, and I've never been able to figure out what they were attempting to do.
I think the problem is that some small but not inconsequential percentage of our police departments have been infiltrated by Nazis.
That could be, but it seemed as though they're, to be charitable, maybe they just haven't figured out the strategy.
No, come on.
Usually
we've had 400, 500 years to figure out how to do policing in this country.
Yes, but there were things that happened in Sacramento that were kind of startling and amazing.
Yeah. Lori, I'm sorry we're out of time, but thank you for sharing that story with us. It's amazing. Thank you so much. We'll be right back.
On April 5th.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Or go to Tom's. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Boy, there's, as I said, I think that it's time to begin a campaign in the United States and to take down every Confederate statue or monument in this country, just to say enough. Now, I realize, I think her name was Stephanie Rollins, where did it go? I've got so much paper here. Anyway, the mayor of one of these towns, I think it was Baltimore. Yeah, it was Baltimore. Stephanie Rollins is the mayor of Baltimore, and she ordered that signs be put in front of the Confederate monuments, in front of 4 Confederate monuments in Baltimore that say, quote, "These monuments were part of a propaganda campaign of national pro-Confederate organizations to perpetuate the beliefs of white supremacy, to falsify history, and to support segregation and racial intimidation." End of quote. You know, that's the sign that should be in front of the statue if the statue is moved into some museum. But the state should not even fund the museum, right? If some very wealthy Nazi wants to create a museum, like the creationist guys, they created their museum in Tennessee or Kentucky or wherever it was. And, you can go to the creationist museum and see men riding dinosaurs back, and so, if some crazy right-winger with more money than he knows what to do, and there's certainly no shortage of those, wants to create, some museums that other right-wingers can go to and look at these statues, well, then the right-winger wouldn't put this kind of sign in front of it, would it? Unless the city said, okay, we'll sell you the statues for $1 or whatever, or for the cost of removal, but you must put this statue on them, or this sign on them indicating what's going on. But this, and by the way, now Mayor Catherine Pugh, the new mayor of Baltimore, says, screw it. We're not even going to do the signs. We're going to take these things down. So it's like this. These are memorials to the worst part of American history. And then, then we've got this guy, Congressman Tom Garrett, U.S. Representative Tom Garrett, this by the Roanoke newspaper in Dateline Charlottesville. U.S. Representative Tom Garrett insists he's not afraid to stand up to Donald Trump, although, well, actually, I have the wrong piece of paper here in front of me. Anyway, we'll get back to this in just a minute. We're going to pick up your calls. I want to share why, as I said to Mark Potok, why I believe the Republican Party has been throwing in with the Klan and the Nazis now ever since Richard Nixon. But we'll pick up your calls. I think we all need to vent and share a little bit and just process what happened this weekend, right after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with your calls, Ed.
Hi, it's the Thom Hartmann Book Club with the Thom Hartmann University, and today we're reading from Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink. I'm reading from the preface. This is page XIII. The world right now is tottering atop 3 major thresholds. An environment that is so afire that it may soon no longer be able to support human life. An economic free market system that is almost entirely owned, run, and milked by a tiny fraction of 1% of us and has crashed and in many ways is burning around us. And an explosion of human flesh on the planet that has turned our species into a global petri dish just waiting for an effective agent to run amok. 4 mistakes have brought us to this point, and the failure to recognize them at their deepest level will only push us faster toward total tipping points, where we are thrown over the 3 thresholds and into disaster. All four of these mistakes are grounded in our culture, our way of thinking, our way of seeing the world, the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and why we're here. The first mistake is a belief that we're separate from nature. Our religions tell us that we were created by a supernatural being who is not part of this earth and not from this planet. He set us apart from all other life, and many among us, perhaps even the majority of the 6 billion of us, roughly 7 billion now, don't even believe that we are animals, but instead think we're a totally unique life form. The second mistake is a belief that an abstraction, an economic system, is divine and separate from us. This mythical so-called free market, so we believe, operates under its own divine rules and is entirely and eternally self-regulating. It is always right. The fact that worldwide it's more than 95% owned and run by fewer than 0.00001% of us, it's just the way things are, always were, and always will be. We are here to serve the economy, this belief goes. It's not here to serve us. The third mistake is a belief that men should run the world and that women are their property. While it may seem that women's rights are well advanced and society is nearly egalitarian in the developed world, the United States, Western Europe, and Australia combined are only about a quarter of the population of the world. In India, it's still a common rural practice for men to burn their wives to death simply because it's more convenient than divorce. In many Arab countries and across much of Africa and South America, it's not uncommon for women to be murdered by their families if they dishonor the family by not going along with an arranged marriage or not being a virgin at time of marriage. Even in the first world, women are routinely excluded from positions of power in the world's largest institutions, such as the Catholic Church. This is one of our biggest mistakes, not just because it's morally deficient or because it can be biologically challenged, but because its primary result is an explosion in population. The fourth mistake is a belief that the best way to influence people is through fear rather than through the power of love, compassion, or support. We stand baffled when Palestinians in Gaza vote for a political party that has a long history of terrorist activity, somehow completely overlooking the fact that that same group has been feeding people, building schools and hospitals, and providing old age and widow pensions to people in need. We think we can threaten and bomb people into liking us and behaving in ways consistent with our best interests while ignoring their own best interests. We have come to believe that we are not our brother's keeper, that we are separate from all other humanity on the planet, and in all that, we are mistaken. Civilizations have come and gone, and those long gone vanished mostly because they despoiled their commons, allowed small elites to control their economies and governments, and lived in ways that were unsustainable. Those who survive for centuries or millennia are the ones that learned how to protect their commons, engage in non-toxic commerce and governance, and organize their cultures and lifestyles in ways that could continue in the same place and the same way down through the ages. If we don't learn the lessons of the latter, we shall face the fate of the former. And just a little bit from the first chapter. This is titled Darfur, and on the border with Darfur, Sudan, March 16th, 2008. It's late morning, and I'm sitting on the dirt ground typing it into an old AA battery-operated pocket word processor, a Zorus ZR5000, in part because the nearest electricity is over 500 miles away. So is the nearest paved road and the nearest building made with anything other than mud or grass. This is Gok Machar, southern Sudan, just a few miles from the border with Darfur, a village that's swelled from 8,000 people to more than 45,000 as refugees flee the bombings and murders take place as I type these words just 50 miles to the northwest. About 300 people arrived just this morning, most with nothing more than the clothes they were wearing, many with stories of relatives who died along the way as they fled or before the UN could transport them here. When we first arrived on the African continent, we looked out onto the nighttime savannah beyond our Nairobi hotel, and it was truly a startling sight, one I'd almost forgotten since my last visit to Kenya back in 1982. The landscape is huge, horizon to horizon, like the movies you see of these parts of Africa. The land here in South Sudan is just as vast and flat. The 45,000 people around me share one single hand-pumped well, drilled a decade ago by the UN, and no other infrastructure beyond that. No buildings, no roads, no septic tank or sewer system, no schools, no clinics, no hospitals, no stores, or even storehouses. Nothing. The book is Threshold, the progressive plan to pull America back from the brink.
want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and let's have a conversation about this. Linwood in Gordonsville, Virginia. Hey, Linwood, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm actually at the rally. My family told me, don't go down there, don't go down there, don't go down there. I'm like, well, I'm gonna check this out because I was coming to pick up my van from my mother and father's house, and I saw those same protesters, pro and anti-protesters, on the same sidewalk going to the protest on a strip in Charlottesville called Preston Avenue. And they were just as civil. They were just as, they didn't get into no fight or anything. So I'm like, if they really hated each other, really opposed each other on the issue, they would have been out there, getting into a scuffle right there. But
maybe. I mean, just because you disagree with somebody doesn't mean you have to punch them.
I mean, but Tom, I said, you know what? Let me find out if it's like Alex Jones is calling it a false flag or not. Yeah. So me being the kind of person I am, let me go down. So I went down there, went downtown Charlottesville, and it had no alleys here. The alley which that dude came through and hit those protesters, that alley was originally closed. No traffic could go in, no traffic could come out. So it was definitely suspicious how that car got into that one Pacific lane, that one Pacific alley, because it has two speed bumps there. Your car's gonna be messed up if you go in that fast. Your muffler gonna be jacked up,
right? Or your transmission,
It was definitely suspicious how that went down. Now, as I went down there, yes, these neo-Nazi groups were down there, but these weren't the kind of neo-Nazis that we know that they are. These are neo-Nazis that are cleaning up their image. Gone are the days with the skinheads and the white power stuff. These guys now look like your college professors. They belong to fraternities. This is what they came out looking like.
Right.
Clean. Was there fighting going on? You bet your behind it was. It was a lot of fighting. I was talking to both sides of the crew, and it wasn't about a minute or a second later, it was fights breaking out all over the place. As far as police were concerned, they were outnumbered. When the protesters couldn't beat up on the white racists, they started beating up on the police officers. And the police officers had to retreat. So the police was not everywhere policing everything because they were spread the hell thin.
Yeah.
And these Blue Lives Matter people, where are they at then? They didn't care about these police officers when they were getting the hell beat out of them in the midst of a protest trying to break up fights. Fights was breaking up town like the plague. You saw a fight down here. You saw a fight down here.
Well, Linwood, what I'm hearing from a very good friend of mine, who I saw this morning before I came into the radio studio here. He just walked up to me and just started talking. I mean, he was so freaked out. He was like, I'm having PTSD. He said, two friends of mine went to, as I recall, it was Greensboro, North Carolina, and both of them were killed by fascists. And this was some years ago in Greensboro. And he said, and I would have been with them, except that, a friend of mine called and I had to go over to his house, and stop there on the way there and blah, blah. He says, but, had it not been for that phone call, I'd be dead right now at the hands of these fascists. And the guys who killed these 4 or 5 people in Greensboro, they were acquitted, these white guys. So, but anyhow, he said that, what he heard from the people is that basically the police just kind of stood back and let it happen. And what I'm hearing from people is that at least initially, as the fascists began beating up the anti-fascists, the cops just stood there and said, oh, well, that's cool. And it wasn't until the fascists were basically done beating up people and started moving along to another place that the cops moved in. You were there, Linwood. Does your experience comport with that description that I keep reading on Twitter and whatnot?
Tom, all of that took place. There was points where the police, because it spread it like the plague. It started down right where the Jefferson-Madison Regional Library was in the downtown area where behind the back of where the Paramount Theater is, exactly where Emancipation Park is. that's where they tried to concentrate it at.
Right.
Keep the protesters right in that area where it wouldn't mess with the general population. Well, they did a piss poor job then because it spread all the way downtown to where there's a gym down there called ACAC. It spread it all the way down to where Garrett Square, which is a housing area, housing development area.
Well, wasn't that the Nazis saying, okay, we're leaving here and we're going to go to the place where there's a large concentration of people of color and try to intimidate them?
Well, actually, no. They actually left. They was up on Ridge McIntyre on 250 West.
Mm-hmm.
They went to 250 West, and the National Guard had came in. And they couldn't, and the National Guard specifically told them they couldn't go left, they couldn't go right. They had to stay right there. And if they went anywhere, they would be arrested.
Right.
They already called it an unlawful assembly. Both sides everybody had damn tear gas, everybody had pepper spray, so you didn't know who was spraying what with pepper spray or tear gas. Everybody came prepared.
Yeah. This is, my friend talking about what happened in Greensboro some years back. This is just a quick clip from Linwood. I got to move along, but thank you so much for the call. This is a quick clip from from a survivor of the Greensboro massacre. Now, this, just to put this in historical context, we have a long history of white supremacist terrorism in the United States. The oldest white supremacist terrorist group. The oldest terrorist group in the United States is the Klan. And they were out there in force this last weekend. But this is from Greensboro. Here we go.
And there were sort of several clusters.
Is there audio on this?
Hanging around.
There will be in
just
a
the
second.
Community center there. And it was a
so
very
we're
several people mentioned
there's
cops. Sandy mentioned that, I remember. Because every demonstration we have, I mean, it's like we have our own personal police force. These cops are on our case all the time.
Okay, so that's then. This is now. Here's David Duke via NBC talking about what happened in Charlottesville over the weekend and how pleased he was by the president's response to it. David Duke.
How you doing? This represents a turning point for the people of this country. We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back, and that's what we got to do.
There you go. And I think that's why Donald Trump has not repudiated these guys. It's pretty amazing. And then Fox News goes on, the Fox and Friends this morning and basically says, oh, yeah, white supremacy, no problem. Or
come out and said we need to get rid of this type of stuff in our country, neo-Nazism and white supremacy.
Just pointing out that Antifa, though, also ought to be called out, just
That's
like
the
violent aspects of
anti-fascists.
Black Lives Matter ought to be called out.
Sure.
You can call that out, but still also listen, say, on Black Lives Matter, to the grievances of young African-American males in urban cores who feel like they're looked at differently by police. That discussion still should be had, just like young white men who feel like, hey, I'm treated differently in this country than I feel like I should have. I've become a second-class citizen. I think the president nailed it. He condemned in the strongest possible terms hatred and bigotry on all sides, as opposed to immediately picking a side out the gate. He saluted the police specifically for what they did. It's not multiculturalism first, it's America first. And if we see ourselves through that lens, then it unites us as opposed to dividing us.
right, if we see it through that lens, we hate the fascists as much as we hate the people protesting the fascists. Oh, Fox News. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Hey, how you doing, Tom?
Good.
I don't know. I just thought about this all weekend, and I just wanted to talk to you because it's very disturbing what happened, but, this is the reality that we're living in. And I guess I woke up this morning just thinking one thing, and that, people that's marching with the KKK and the skinheads, all these white supremacists, they seem like they're broken people.
Yeah.
However they was raised, whatever ideology, and they seem to have a superiority complex. But these people seem like they've entered into the world, and everything that they've been taught, it wasn't so, or it's not the reality, and they don't seem like they can cope with it.
I think what it boils down to, Charles, is that a lot of white people are really upset that their white privilege is being taken away, that they're going to have to participate as equal members of society alongside people of color and alongside women. This is mostly white males. And these white men, by and large, they don't like that. They want their position of power in society back. They want to be, the lord of the plantation in the antebellum South, and that's why they worship Robert E. Lee and friends. I think that's just the bottom line. Charles, well said. Thank you. This is a white supremacist at the rally with a gun, threatening to shoot protesters over the weekend.
Go ahead, tell him. I'll shoot you.
Guy pulls his gun out, and then you've got these guys, throwing rocks. You see, he keeps waving his gun around at these people. I mean, this is enough to scare the hell out of anybody. This is not a good situation. This is not America. We'll be back with more of your calls and my thoughts and our conversation as we process what happened over the weekend. And what does it mean for this country? What does it mean that the President of the United States is going to attack the African-American president of Merck, a pharmaceutical company, for pulling out of his counsel because of his lack of a statement against white supremacy?
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
So Trump won't attack the fascists, but he will attack the CEO of Merck, who happens to be African-American. He tweeted against the guy this morning. Really? And welcome back. Corky in Hilton, New York. Hey, Corky, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. Yeah, I can't stand the way the people on TV, reporters, are giving this guy equal presence with a man of intelligence.
Which guy?
This guy is, what he's doing.
You're talking about Trump? Who's this guy you keep talking about, Corky?
Trump.
Oh, okay. All right. Continue.
He doesn't have the mentality. What he's going, if you go against me, I'm going to tear you apart. He will not acknowledge a white supremacy because they want him to. It's like when I was in school and I had an arch enemy. I bent his arm up in his back asking him to say uncle. And he wouldn't say it.
Yeah.
He'd say, well, your aunt's husband.
Well, there's breaking news now, and, gee, what a surprise. Neo-Nazis and white supremacists are criminals and thugs, says Donald Trump. I don't yet know in what venue or under what circumstances he said this, or whether it was attributed to him by a press person who just said, we've got to get this under control, or what. Looks like what? Yeah, it looks like he gave a statement. Okay, we'll find out. Anyhow, Corky, continue. I'm sorry. Forgive my interruption.
Did he really say white supremacy?
Well, we'll find out. I don't have the statement yet. I'm just, I've got a couple of TV monitors on in the studio here, and it was just on the Chiron. It's on CNN right now. Trump, those who cause violence are criminals and thugs. But, and hate groups are repugnant to everything we hold dear, as the Chiron and MSNBC. I need to get it. I need to get it. I'll do that at the top of the hour and get the context and everything. But look at how long it took him. It's just, this is just, it's dog whistle politics. It's just absolutely dog whistle politics.
Statement. This is the boy king.
Yeah. He really is. Corky, thanks for the call. Tom in Culver City, California. Hey, Tom, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's up?
I wanted to answer the lady who said, I couldn't understand why the police were holding back. It's well known that in 1965, in the, quote, riots in L.A., which we call the uprising, and in Greensboro, and in 1990, the Rodney King, they all did the exact same thing. The police hold back until the melees start and get really heavy, then they come. they know exactly what's going to happen. So you were correct. They had 500 years to figure out how to do this well, and they do it well. Yeah. They know exactly what to do. And the second point is that Republicans, when I attempt to have a conversation with them about Trump, and they continue to defend him and defend the Republican elected officials, it's just, I've had it with them. The fact is they are still, to this day, they continue to defend Republicans and Trump. Unless they call 5 elected officials every day, then they're not doing their job as citizens of the United States. And I've just really had it with Republicans.
Yeah, I think much of America has, and this is why those Republicans who want to run for president, people like Cory Booker and Marco Rubio, were quick to come out and say, oh, we condemn racists and fascists, which probably means that they will never be president of the United States in the Republican ticket, because the Republican base, a large, a not inconsequential portion of it, are fascists and racists. Tom, thanks for the call. Well said. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Kenyatta in Loma Linda, California. Hey, Kenyatta, what's on your mind today? It's been a while since we've talked.
How are you, Tom?
I'm well. I hope you are too.
I am, and I'm actually in Redlands. I think I might have given
Redmond.
On another phone. I think I gave Louise the wrong zip code. But anyways, I wanted to share with you an experience that I had when this took place. My daughter and I, she's just graduated from high school, lovely young lady, and we were watching the night before the young lady was killed. We were watching the protests and the torches that these people were carrying. And I remember when I was a boy, 50-some years ago, watching that very same image. The photos were, the film was black and white, but there were crosses. And the same type of people, the same racist, they weren't so bold as to uncover themselves. They had pillowcases on. But I remember that eerie glow. And here I am with a kid that's 18 years old, all these many years later, watching the same thing. And my father before me talked about those same eerie images. And so we keep talking about this conversation, the conversation. Every time Tamir writes, we got to have a conversation on race. Walter Scott, we got to have a conversation. We've been having the same damn conversation for over a century.
Yeah.
You see, it's not the conversation. The Civil War never ended for us as black people, Tom.
Yep.
We need to have, it's not the conversation. We need a paradigm shift in the conversation.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Tear down the damn monuments and let's put an end to this thing. Let's brand the stars and bars, the Confederate battle flag, as essentially the same thing as the swastika. It is the logo of a failed, treasonous attempt at insurrection against us, against the United States of America.
I know that, and it's interesting that you brought up the swastika, because the black man in this country is constantly taught to forget. You forget. Now, I'm not taking nothing away from the Holocaust, horrible event in humankind. But they say never forget. But the black man, you're told to forget, and this is the conversation I want to have as a black man. I want to have a conversation as to why it is you're constantly telling me, I'm speaking rhetorically, that I don't see what I see.
Right.
So I don't see that George Stinney was 14 years old, so diminutive in size, supposedly killed 2 white girls at 14 years old, the youngest person ever put to death in this country. They had to modify the electric chair to fry his little body. I'm supposed to not see that. I'm supposed to not see that the black man in this country consistently has the shortest life expectancy of any other demographic group. I'm supposed to, this guy that you had on earlier waving the gun around at this protest, I'm not supposed to sit up and think as a black man, now if that had been a black man that bought his ass there waving the gun around, that would have turned out entirely different. I'm not, see, that's the conversation I want to have. I want to have the conversation as to why you're telling me, why you're pissing on me and telling me it's raining. That's the conversation.
Yeah. And I realize you're not speaking to me, you're speaking to, our culture as a whole, I guess, or the well, who specifically do you think you're speaking to when you say that, Kenyatta? What's in your mind?
I'm speaking to the society at large. I'm speaking mainly to white people because white people run the system.
Yeah.
If white people wanted police killings, for instance, if white people truly, as a group, wanted them to stop, they would stop. Black Lives Matter can run around, sing songs and hymns, get their heads bashed in. They can do all of that, and I'm not taking anything away from them. We've been doing the same thing, since I was born in 1963. Yeah. It's been the same thing.
What are your, Kenyatta, as I recall, you are a former law enforcement officer. Am I recalling correctly?
Correct.
What were you? I'm assuming you were watching over the weekend. What did you think about the restraint of the police while the Nazis were beating up the anti-fascist protesters?
There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah.
That's what I think.
Yeah.
One of the reasons that I've alluded this to you before, one of the reasons that I had a very, very short career, a matter of 18 months in law enforcement, was because of the systemic, the entire training process is racist. Some of it subliminal, some of it overt. We've talked before, not too many years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. We had a situation in Miami-Dade, some county in Miami, where the officers were using black mugshots of black arrestees for target practice.
Right.
This is what I'm talking about. I don't want to have a conversation about race. I know what it is. You know what it is. It is what it is. What I want to talk about is why you, and when I say you, I mean people in general are constantly telling black people we don't see what we see. But if we look at every socioeconomic metric, we're at the bottom. So something's jumping off. What?
Yeah, this is a white problem that white people need to own. And I think the good news is it's getting harder and harder for all of the institutions that support structural racism in the society, from our schools to our media to our political system, to bury it, hide it, pretend it doesn't matter. Scream about Muslim terrorism, but never talk about white terrorism. It's getting harder and harder to do that. At least from where I'm sitting, it looks that way. Kenyatta, your thoughts?
I just wanted to say one thing. I hope you're right. I tend to be an optimist, but I'm also a cynic. But I will tell you this much, Tom. One of the things that's very subtle that I don't understand here is why this young man was not. You always overcharge as a prosecutor. You always, because you may end up making a deal. So, art of the deal.
All right, why didn't they charge him with first degree? Is that?
Why was he not charged with first degree murder?
Yeah.
I don't get that one.
I think it's because he didn't specifically intend to kill that particular person. But, I'm just guessing. I'm guessing that they're going to pin him with what they think they can get. But
you can always go down, Tom.
I know. I know. I share your outrage. I absolutely do. And they say they're looking for his allies. Well, hey, there's pictures of him with the local Republican congressman. Perhaps not him. Maybe it was the guy who set the conference up. There's pictures. Anyway, Kenyatta, thank you for the call. It's always good talking with you, my friend. Thank you so much. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from ADHD and the Edison Gene, a drug-free approach to managing the unique qualities of your child. A relatively new book by me. This is from the introduction. I was in India in 1993 to help manage a community for orphans and blind children on behalf of a German charity. During the monsoon season, the week of the big Hyderabad earthquake, I took an all-day train ride almost all the way across the subcontinent, from Bombay through Hyderabad to Rajahmundry, to visit an obscure town near the Bay of Bengal. In the train compartment with me were several Indian businessmen and a physician, and we had plenty of time to talk as the country flew by from sunrise to sunset. Curious about how they viewed our children diagnosed as having attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, I asked, are you familiar with those types of people who seem to crave stimulation, yet have a hard time staying with any one focus for a period of time? They may hop from career to career and sometimes even from relationship to relationship, never seeming to settle into one job or into a life with one person, but the whole time they remain creative, incredibly creative and inventive. Ah, we know this type well, one of the men said, the other three nodding in agreement. Well, what do you call this personality type? I asked them. Very holy, he said. These are old souls near the end of their karmic cycle. Again, the other three nodded agreement, perhaps a bit more vigorously in response to my startled look. Old souls, I questioned, thinking that a very odd description for those who American psychiatrists have diagnosed as having a particular disorder. Oh, yes, the physician said. In our religion, we believe that the purpose of reincarnation is to eventually free oneself from worldly entanglement and desire. In each lifetime, we experience certain lessons, and finally we are free of this earth and can merge into the oneness of God. When a soul is very close to the end of those thousands of incarnations, he must take a few lifetimes to do many, many things, to clean up all the little threads left over from his previous lifetimes. Another businessman added, this is a man very close to being enlightened. We have great respect for such individuals, although their lives may be difficult. Another businessman raised a finger and interjected, but it is through the difficulties of such lives the souls are purified. The others nodded agreement. I said, in America, they consider this behavior indicative of a psychiatric disorder. All three looked startled and then laughed. In America, you consider our most holy men, our yogis and swamis, to be crazy people as well, said the physician, with a touch of sadness in his voice. So it is with different cultures. We live in different worlds. We in the Western world have such holy and nearly enlightened people among us, and we say they must be mad. But as we're about to see, they may instead be our most creative individual, our most extraordinary thinkers, our most brilliant inventors and pioneers. To children among us, whom our teachers and psychiatrists say are disordered, they may in fact carry a set of abilities, a skill set that was necessary for the survival of humankind in the past, that has created much of what we presently treasure as our quality of life, and that will be critical to the survival of the human race in the future. There is immense power in how we choose to view what's happening around us, and this is terrifically important when we consider how we can best know our children and provide them with the upbringing they need, an upbringing that will lead them to be healthy, happy, functioning adults. The premise of this book is that children who have what we have come to know as ADHD are important and vital gifts to our society and culture, and in the largest sense can be an extraordinary gift to the world. In addition, for those adults who have been similarly diagnosed or defined, this book offers a new way of understanding themselves and their relationship to the world, a way that brings insight, empowerment, and success. The long history of the human race, as we'll see in this book, has conferred on us, some more than others, a set of predilections, temperaments, and abilities carried through the medium of our genetic makeup. These skills are ideally suited to life in the ever-changing world of our ancient ancestors, and we have now discovered are also ideally suited to the quickly changing modern world of cyberspace and widespread ecological and political crises that require rapid response. I will call this genetic gift the Edison gene, after Thomas Edison, who brought us electric lights and phonographs and movies and literally 10,000 other inventions. He is the model for the sort of impact a well-nurtured child carrying this gene can have on the world. While I'm principally referring to the DRD4 gene, see Chapter 5, the science of genetics is embryonic, with new discoveries being made every day. No doubt, sometime soon we'll have a better, more complete list of the specific genes that make up what Dave DeBronkart first called the Edison trait back in 1992, and Lucy Jo Palladino expanded on considerably in 1997 in her wonderful book, The Edison Trait. When Thomas Edison's school teacher threw him out of school in the 3rd grade for being fidgety, slow, and inattentive, his mother, Nancy Edison, the well-educated daughter of a Presbyterian minister, was deeply offended by the schoolmaster's characterization of her son. As a result, she pulled him out of school, and she became his teacher from then until the day he went off to work on his own for the railroads. And thus continues the story of people with ADHD and great success and how you can help your child be like that.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here. Oh, the president. I wanted to tell you what's been going on here with Donald Trump. Finally, after 3 days, they were able to dig a speechwriter out of the White House who could carefully craft a paragraph for the president to publish. And this is what this is the statement that is attributed to President. This is the statement that is attributed to Donald Trump this morning. Quote, racism is evil, and those who cause violence in its name are criminals and thugs, including KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. We are a nation founded on the truth that all of us are created equal. We are equal in the eyes of our Creator. We are equal under the law. We are equal under the Constitution. Those who spread violence in the name of bigotry strike at the very core of America. All right. So he finally comes out after 3 days, after being shamed. Kenneth Frazier, the chairman and chief executive officer of Merck, wrote, I am resigning from the President's American Manufacturing Council. Our country's strength stems from its diversity and the contributions made by men and women of different faiths, races, sexual orientations, and political beliefs. Our America's leaders must honor our fundamental values by clearly rejecting expressions of hatred, bigotry, and group supremacy, which run counter to the American ideal. And then less than an hour later, Donald Trump says, Ken Frazier, keep in mind, the only African-American CEO on his manufacturing council. So Trump comes out and says, now that Ken Frazier of Merck Pharma has resigned from the President's Manufacturing Council, he will have more time to lower rip-off drug prices. Right. This is pretty pathetic. Very pathetic. Larry, I don't have a city for you. I'm sorry. It doesn't say where you're calling from.
Yeah, I'm calling. Well, I live in Martinsburg, West Virginia.
Okay.
I'm in Winchester, Virginia.
But it says that you had an answer to Kenyatta's question from the last segment about why didn't they throw the first-degree murder at him and then, if necessary, plea bargain it down or let the jury take it down to second-degree murder?
Yeah, I do. I was a felony prosecutor for 23 years. I've tried many of these cases. The way the law works in West Virginia, and I'm sure it's the same in Virginia, is that all homicide cases are indicted as second-degree, charged and indicted as second-degree murder cases. And then if the evidence is sufficient at trial to find evidence of premeditation as well as malice, malice aforethought, then the judge will let us argue first-degree murder to the jury, or the jury can find first-degree murder on its own.
Well, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting little quirk in the law, but that's the way it works.
So the second-degree murder is simply, that's what you have to start with, at least in West Virginia, where you practiced law for 23 years as a prosecutor, and presumably in Virginia.
Yes, I believe so. Most of West Virginia's law and West Virginia and Virginia's laws line up, mirror each other pretty closely.
Yeah, which just makes sense. I mean, it's the whole region. Larry, thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, you're welcome, Tom.
And thank you, and thanks for listening to SiriusXM. Dave in Federal Way, Washington. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, not too much, Tom. I got a couple of quick points. Hey, I subscribe to a newsletter by a scientist, an archaeologist, mainly because he is interested in archaeology, human psychology, and climate change. And I happen to be interested in that topic as well, right? Mm-hmm. But on his newsletter, he does have some political stuff that I noticed like a couple of weeks ago. Now, I don't know, he might have some other writers contributing that, though. But one story was about these white nationalists actually contributing or complimenting Trump's events. And I was like, wow, man. But anyways, I just kind of, I mean, that was before this. This was a couple of weeks ago. And I just kind of dismissed it. And the other thing I wanted to say, and I know for a fact, because I've had to intervene in a couple of these, for a while now, these white nationalists have been going around saying that you could run over a protester and get by with it. As a matter of fact, a couple of younger guys, I had to tell them, I said, look, as a matter of fact, one white nationalist threatened to beat me up over it. I had to tell this young guy because I didn't want to get in trouble. I was like, that's not true. I mean, and I said, just think about it. There's local laws. There's local laws. I mean, even if the Trump administration did somehow say it was okay to run over protesters, there's local laws that take precedent and all that. I said, just, and state laws can overrule local laws. This from CNN.com. This was back in 2017, April of 2017, April 24th. The headline: numerous states considering anti-protest bills. And they start out talking about North Carolina, and then they say state lawmakers in Georgia, Iowa, Tennessee, and Florida have pushed bills to boost penalties for blocking roads and highways or trespassing. These are anti-protest laws. With the Florida bill also exempting drivers from liability for unintentionally injuring or even killing protesters who do so. Last month, the Tennessee legislature passed a bill sponsored by Republican State Representative Jimmy Matlock that would make it a misdemeanor to obstruct streets, quadrupling the fine. Republican Governor Bill Haslam signed the bill earlier this month. In Minnesota, legislators are considering 2 highway obstruction bills and a measure that would allow protesters to be sued for the cost of police in their protests. Republican State Representative Nick Zerwas, who had a hand in all 3 bills, said he co-authored one of them after hearing how his constituents were affected when protesters shut down freeways, a tactic he called the go-to protest move. So far, it's Texas and North Dakota that have actually passed laws saying that if you accidentally, in quotes, run down a protester and kill them, you can't be held guilty for murder. Well, I just had to intervene for a moral reason. Priority one, preserve human life. I mean, I didn't want to see some young guy go out and I don't want to see anybody go out and run somebody over.
Yeah.
But my question to you is like, how do we get ahead of all this? I mean, because like I said, it's like we're trying to react to what these white nationalists have been like working arduously on.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, Dave, it's a damn good question. And I think that the principal answer is what we're doing right now. We need to start talking about it. We need to start talking about it in blunt terms and calling it out for what it is. Dave, thanks a lot for the call. Online with us, a friend of mine who was at the rally over the weekend, and his first name is Nate. We'll just stay with that. Nate, welcome to the show.
Hey, how's it going, Tom?
Good. So tell me what you experienced. You and I talked this morning, and I thought that
In particular, the thing that really perked my ears up was your comment, and we actually had a caller in the last hour who said essentially the same thing, that many of these fascists, while the cameras like to go to the guys with the long hair and the beards who look like bikers, the fact of the matter is that an awful lot of these Nazi fascist Klan members looked like they had just stepped out of a college fraternity kegger or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was definitely the most disturbing part to me. I think if you've been on a college campus in America, you ask anybody who's, gone to class with people of conservative leanings, they'll notice that the people that they saw there seems like someone you could have known, seems like someone you could have had a class with who was really animated about stopping political correctness. I think it was disturbing to see people how familiar the fascists were. I think, you get this idea in your head that there's going to be German stormtroopers marching down the street, and it's like 1942 all over again. But it's been since Saturday, what's particularly upset me is how familiar the fascists look. I think that's something that we can't ever forget, is how easily white males in this society can turn to fascism.
Yeah, I think it was Hannah Arendt who referred to it as the banality of evil.
Yeah.
You and I talked on Friday before you left, and you were somewhat concerned for your safety and for all this. You were 30 feet away from where Heather was killed, when she was killed. Heather Heyer, the young woman who the Nazis are trashing all over their right-wing websites. I don't know if you've looked at any of those this morning.
I've seen headlines, but I've tried to avoid. I made the mistake of looking at some of the Nazis' Facebook pages that were revealed on the internet, and it was pretty disturbing. But yeah, I have seen those headlines.
So what what stories would you like to share with us from your experience in Charlotte?
I think to stay on the positive side, I want people to understand that the moment right before the terrorist attack was an incredibly positive feeling. You had Black Lives Matter protesters, you had DSA protesters, you had the IWW, you had the anarchists, you had Antifa, you had Surge, Stand Up for Racial Justice, and we were all marching down downtown Charlottesville. And the feeling was that we had won the day. The Nazi protests in Emancipation Park had been declared an unlawful assembly. We heard that Richard Spencer had been detained. We heard that Baked Alaska, who's one of the other, neo-fascist internet celebrities, we heard he had been maced. The feeling was that our solidarity and resistance had won out. And that feeling was incredibly powerful. And I think people need to remember that when people from all classes of life, and particularly working people, stand up against Nazis, we will win. It happened in Britain in the 1930s in the Battle of Cable Street, and hopefully it will continue to happen again. I think this is a threat that needs to be nipped in its bud and resisted at all costs because the stakes are just too high.
Yeah. Well, it happened in the United States in the 1860s.
Yeah.
It's just that, Andrew Johnson, became president, and that was kind of, well, that's a whole long story. We need not, go through the history of we just have a minute to the break here, Nate. Any thoughts on going forward? What are you and your friends going to be doing, for example?
I think there needs to be a concerted effort to resist the alt-right, and I use that terminology only just because that's the way they collectively call themselves, and sort of a catch-all for groups with a bunch of different agendas, but they're really just fascists and neo-Nazis. I think we need to take this threat seriously. It's clearly attracting people who in the past have been the shock troops of fascism, and I think it represents a real threat to democracy, especially when we have a president who clearly sympathizes with it or fails to understand why it's a threat. I think it needs to be resisted at all costs.
Yeah, we've talked before about how FDR famously saved us from both communism and fascism. I don't know about this guy in the White House. Nate, thanks a lot for the call.
You're welcome.
Good talking with you. We'll be back with more of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day. John Dingell tweeting, I signed up to fight Nazis 73 years ago. I'd do it again if I have to. It's been retweeted 264,000 times.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Good on John Dingell. We'll be back. Welcome back. Rich, watching Free Speech TV in Greenwood, Indiana. Hey, Rich, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. I wanted to offer some historical perspective to make sure people know what we're dealing with as this mess has come up in Seaville. These guys have a history with the United States and its structure of governance that was legitimate once upon a time. Our government stood where these creeps are today.
Right, for the first 80 years of its existence, yes.
And, well, let's just go back 50
70
years. Yes. Let's just go back 50 years and look at what Director Hoover's counterintelligence program had as a title for one of its identified sets of people to crack down on. Black nationalist hate groups, quote unquote,
right,
is the title of a counterintelligence program group. And that is where Martin Luther King, Joe Louis, Malcolm X,
Muhammad Ali,
all of these people were characterized with that as the title for their activity. When counterintelligence program was discovered, remember, COINTELPRO was identified on the New Left, the college campuses, as the very first document discovered with COINTELPRO on it. And this has a history. You know, Jefferson Beauregard Sessions grew up in this atmosphere, and now he's in charge of it again.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very good point, Rich. And I mean, you know, it was only in 1965 basically that we repudiated Jim Crow at the level of law, and you know, and the Republicans are still perpetuating Jim Crow by way of voter suppression, and you know, redistricting, and banks are still redlining. They're just doing it in ways that are a little harder to detect, and you know, it's all this is all still very much with us.
We are fighting, and we take and we change the policy, but this toxicity is still there. And we have bad actors who have come to positions of power by their economic activities. Please remember the first Donald Sterling. Remember what Donald Sterling was identified for, and then he had to just sell his basketball team. And when that was coming forward as a news story, it was Lou Alcindor. Help me remember his...
Kareem Abdul-Jabbar.
Kareem comes forward and he says, the battle days are not over. And this was more than 2 years ago. And the battle days are never over for people of conscience when this monster keeps coming up from underneath.
Yeah, this is a cancer in America. It's a cancer. It's a poison. And when white people figure out that it's a poison, then we'll deal with it. And I think that is slowly happening. I think it's been slowly happening throughout my lifetime, you know, over the last 60 plus years. But it seems to be speeding up right now. In some ways, thank you, Rich, for the call. In some ways, having a racist as president, I think, might be speeding up the process. We'll see.
On
April 15th.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
Welcome back. Mike in West Palm Beach, Florida. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Let me take you off speaker. I'm sorry about that.
That's quite all right. I understand you're driving and listening to Sirius XM. What's up?
I want to, I've heard a lot this morning as usual, and I just want to point out something that's very clear to me. There seems to be a lot of almost hesitancy to point out the discussion about sides. One of your callers said, well, the two sides were walking down the street and they were getting along fine and this and that. There are no two sides in this country. There's only the right side. And when I say right, I mean the moral right. The biggest mistake that we as a country have ever made was to elect Donald Trump. Everybody who elected him in some way or another is complicit with these white supremacists. And all this talk and more talk about rising up to discuss things with them or to reason or have Trump. Let's wait for Trump, as you are, as a good man. You're waiting for Trump to speak, I assume. And his speech.
I'm not. I frankly don't care what Trump says. I think his silence over a 3-day period says everything we need to know.
Right. And you did bring up the wonderful move by the Merck president to leave. And immediately, Trump's visceral, clean reaction without a pre-written script was to attack the black man.
Right.
Now,
and by the way, Merck's stock went up in the wake of this.
Well, that
should tell you something.
Now, I just want to point out something to every listener who's fighting this struggle, black, white, women. Every woman who voted for Trump needs to look at themselves in the mirror, because you know what? The white man, which I am one of, is responsible for the shootings of women and men across this country, young white men primarily. Look at it. Look who's domestic violence, where does it come from? And make a decision that the Nazi flag is the same as the Confederate flag. The biggest mistake this country ever made was to be nice and conciliatory to the South.
No, I agree. The whole Reconstruction thing. You know, I said earlier, by the way, I want to clean this up. I said earlier that, you know, maybe all these statues should be put on some, you know, in some museum owned by some right-wing billionaire. I want to take that back. I think that we should do like Germany has done. They have outlawed this stuff. You cannot buy Nazi memorabilia in Germany. It's against the law to own it. There are no museums that show the stuff of the Third Reich, with the exception of, you know, like Dachau, where we see the crimes of the Third Reich. And I think these things should simply be melted down and they should evaporate into the dustbin of history. There should be no museums. There should be none of it. Just wipe it out. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. And thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM. We'll be back coming up on 27 and a half minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls, my thoughts, and the news of the day right after.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann Book Club with Thom Hartmann University. The book we're reading today is The American Revolution of 1800, written by Dan Sisson with a little bit of help from me and mostly edited by me. I wrote a foreword for it. But it's an absolutely brilliant history of the election of Thomas Jefferson and the times. So reading from chapter 1, page 9, starting out, a quote from Thomas Paine: "For it is the nature and intention of a constitution to prevent governing by party." Oh, really? So often in the past century, the political history of America reveals a paralysis in the highest levels of our government. Legislation fails to pass, budgets are voted down, compromise seems impossible, and the problems of the nation are neither addressed nor solved. There have been brief periods, of course, when this was not the case. The New Deal is usually held up as an example of a time when American politicians actually came together to fundamentally transform the nature and the political landscape of our country. But in the generations since then, more often than not, we've seen gridlock rather than collaboration. Conventional wisdom says that's the way it should be. The founders of this country, the men who wrote the Constitution, wanted there to be a loyal opposition to serve as a balance against excessive power in the hands of any one political party or even president. That's conventional wisdom. Not only is that not true, but this pervasive myth has done considerable harm to our nation and continues to do so. The men in power from 1790 to 1801 did not even remotely conceive of the modern two-party system. In fact, the opposite is true. They wish to consolidate and perpetuate a one-party system in politics in the United States, and were successful in their lifetimes. The terms party and faction have had such a long history that they were widely assumed by American statesmen to be part of human nature. This, at least, was the approach taken by the two men most responsible for establishing the theoretical guidelines of the early republic, the early American Republic. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton attempted to analyze the terms in light of their influence on the political system. Their Federalist essays presented an analysis of party and faction that is more than consistent with the history of the terms we've reviewed. Madison referred to the violence of faction as a dangerous vice characteristic of free governments. By faction, Madison wrote, I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens, or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. In other words, faction is anti-America. He continued, the latent causes of faction are thus sown in the nature of man, and we see them everywhere. Thus, party, as Madison understood it, was not something of recent origin. Parties have been around since the beginning of man. And he noted, quote, the most numerous party, or in other words, the most powerful faction, must be expected to prevail. He ends his analysis on this note. To secure the public good and provide rights against the danger of such a faction, that is then the great object to which our inquiries are directed. Thus, Madison captured the essence of the term faction and party as they were understood by his contemporaries. The faction and party were inescapably rooted in human nature and produced violence, zeal, animosity, oppression, and danger, all adverse to the interests of the community. He added, quote, men of factious tempers or of local prejudices or of sinister designs may by intrigue, by corruption, or by other means first obtain the suffrages, the vote, and then betray the interests of the people. His conclusion is that factions must be broken and controlled. They are at all costs not to be legitimately recognized or encouraged. Madison was not alone in his aversion to faction and party. Alexander Hamilton, too, warns the reader, quote, ambition, avarice, personal animosity, party opposition, and many other motives, not more laudable than these, were typical of that intolerant spirit which has at all times characterized political parties, end of quote. Registering his disgust for faction, Hamilton continued, it is impossible to read the history of the petty republics of Greece and Italy without feeling sensations of horror and disgust at the rapid succession of revolutions by which they were kept in a state of perpetual vibration between the extremes of tyranny and anarchy. Hamilton, we might note, connects ancient history with modern America. The tempestuous situation, he writes, from which Massachusetts has scarcely emerged, he was talking about Shays' Rebellion, evinces the dangers of this kind are not merely speculative. Who could determine what might have been the issue of her late convulsions if the malcontents had not been headed by a Caesar or a Cromwell, end of quote. In Federalist number 77, he describes the influence of faction and party intrigue, connections, and, quote, personal influence in government in a way that was characteristic of the terms from classical times through the age of Robert Walpole. Hamilton wrote, every mere council of appointment, however constituted, will be a conclave in which cabal and intrigue will have their full scope. And as each member will have his friends and connections to provide for, the desire of mutual gratification will beget a scandalous bartering of votes and bargaining for places. What is worth noting here is not only Hamilton's description of the influence of party and faction upon an administration, but his general description of politics. He's describing the politics of England for the previous century and a half. Moreover, he understands that encouraging party and faction at the theoretical as well as the practical level guaranteed that the emergent system of American politics would be propelled into the futile violence and dissension that had plagued every republic in history. Throughout the remainder of his political career, Hamilton reserved a special contempt for parties. The American Revolution of 1800 by Dan Sisson and Thom Hartmann.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Just a couple things off my Twitter feed here. Jeff Washington tweets me, Creation Museum is in the Kentucky suburb of Cincinnati. Please leave Tennessee out of it. Okay. Hashtag who would Jesus hate? Yeah, got it. You're right. Another person, Politically Math, he says, I was conciliatory before, too. We're talking about, what should be done with these statues. And he says, all the tributes to Confederacy must go. I grew up in South Carolina and reject this sick propaganda. And this is an interesting one. J.D. Phillips tweeted this to me. One man had Jesus and Hitler on the same sign. This is from firewalleconomics.com, from a blog there. He did not get that, Jesus and Hitler on the same sign, right? He did not get that confused without help from the Republican propaganda machine. This is not a Trump thing. This is a Republican thing. Republicans have always stirred up hate to fool working class people to vote against their own economic interests. People need to know the political left from the political right. Republicans prey on the politically illiterate. The Democratic Party needs to fight this directly. And which is, the essence of what I was saying earlier, that the billionaires who own the Republican Party and who, clearly and explicitly own any Republican who will deny climate change. The billionaires, the fossil fuel billionaires who own these guys don't give a rat's ass about the state of Black America or what's going on with Muslims or who hates who, but they do want Republicans to be in power. And so when, this is the whole Southern strategy, Lee Atwater, Richard Nixon, the whole thing. It's right there in front of us. And, I mentioned Representative Garrett from Virginia. I got it wrong. I just want to correct this. On Twitter, I'm just reading from this article that was in the Roanoke Times, I think is the newspaper, by Carmen Foreman. And writes, on Twitter, the group decried a photo of Garrett with Charlottesville blogger Jason Kessler. He's the guy who called I believe he's the man who called who created this Unite the Right thing in Charlottesville. On Twitter, the group decried a photo of Garrett with Charlottesville blogger Jason Kessler and two other unidentified men at a meeting in Garrett's office in Washington a few weeks ago. Kessler petitioned for a black Charlottesville city councilman to be removed from office for controversial tweets he posted years ago. Garrett is not affiliated with Kessler or the other men. Kessler and the others who live in the 5th District drove to the nation's capital to meet their congressman, Garrett said. Just a few seconds into Garrett introducing himself at the start of a forum, several protesters stood up and chanted, "White supremacy's got to go." Security promptly kicked them out. But then Garrett was quick to side with the protesters against white supremacy. He said, quote, "There's no place for white supremacy in the Forum of Thomas Jefferson's University." So U.S. Representative Tom Garrett, I'm not sure of your party. It doesn't identify it in this article anywhere. I don't know if he's a Democrat or Republican, but I had my information wrong. So good on you for saying that. Anyhow, back to your calls. Yvonne in Staunton, Virginia. Hey, Yvonne, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Love you. I've been listening to you since the old Air America days.
Well, thank you.
But I too, want to take us back a little bit in history to the Marshall Plan, which I reread this morning. Well, no, I read for the first time. And paragraph 9 states, this is what we put in place in Europe after World War II. Furthermore, governments, political parties, or groups which seek to perpetuate human misery in order to profit therefrom, politically or otherwise, will encounter the opposition of the United States.
Wow.
So we were able to do this in Europe after World War II, and yet we cannot do it in our own country. And I can't think of any more perpetuations of human misery that's worse than slave trades or the Nazis, and yet we are giving them free speech.
Yeah, Well said.
And thank you. Well, they said it.
Yeah.
George Marshall said
Well,
it.
and also, I mean, remember it was Harry Truman who lobbied the Germans, the new German, the post-war German government to write into their constitution the right to unionize, and that every company with over 1,000 employees had to have 50% of their board of directors made up of worker union representative, workers in those factories who were representing their union. So, and national health care and free college education. I mean, all this stuff in modern Germany came about after World War II because Harry Truman was trying to say, hey, if you can prove this stuff works, maybe I can convince these idiot Americans who are opposed to national health care, who are opposed to free college, and et cetera. And, the Marshall Plan was supposed to be this great test, and it was. It succeeded. It's just that, Americans never acknowledged it. Yvonne, I have to move along, but thank you for the call. That was brilliant. I love that. Charlotte in Ramona, California. Hey, Charlotte, what's on your mind today?
Good morning, Tom. I'm calling because, well, first of all, on Friday, my husband and I watched that new movie by Michael Moore, which was brilliant but very depressing. And then this weekend, this whole thing happening, and he and I have just been discussing, do you think if in Seattle and Charlottesville, this was already apparently announced, people everywhere were aware that this right-wing thing was going to happen, what if the progressives, what if the anti-right didn't show up? What if it was just the right-wing nut jobs and the Nazis and all of them doing their thing, and the press ignored them? I realize that's kind of a stretch, but the press would ignore them, people would ignore them. Do you think that would deflate it at all?
I'm not sure. What I do believe is that this was a recruiting drive. What these guys, this whole Unite the Right thing, the whole purpose of it was to bring new people into the movement. So they wanted to get as much publicity as possible, as far and wide as possible, as many people. I think that they welcomed the protesters because it amped up the probability that they would get news. I think that the killing of Heather Heyer may have put a damper on that. But, I looked at the preeminent Nazi right-wing, Nazi website this morning. And they're referring to her in just terrible, terrible terms, just trashing her. And so apparently that didn't, put a dent in them. I mean, Nazis don't mind if people die, I guess. But Charlotte, I don't think that we can any longer afford to ignore this. I guess that's my answer. I honor and congratulate the people who showed up in Charlotte to speak out against racism, hatred, and fascism. And by the way, and Charlotte, thank you for the call. And by the way, Donald Trump finally came out with a finely crafted little paragraph, presumably written by a speechwriter about an hour ago. Nowhere in that does he call this terrorism. If a Muslim had driven a car into a crowd of non-Muslim Americans, and somebody had died, particularly, a young white woman, Donald Trump would be all over it, calling it terrorism. He would be talking about it every other hour for weeks, calling it terrorism. But when a white young man who has identified with the Nazis and Adolf Hitler for a frighteningly long period of time, when that young man murders someone, the White House, the president won't even call it terrorism. This is pathetic. This is not the America that... I was going to say this is not America, but obviously this is happening in America. This is not the America that I think most people who ever fought and died for this country envisioned.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's time to let the whole Confederate, this fetishization of these 4 years of these traitors die.
Welcome back. Joe, watching Free Speech TV in Rock River, Wyoming. Hey, Joe, what's on your mind?
Say, I think I've got a little perspective on how this propagates, you know, the racism and the just general incoherent train of thought of those guys. I mean, my dad and his brothers were all racist to some extent. They didn't care for blacks at all, although they knew a few good ones. So that was around me as a kid. And eventually I had to recognize what was really going on, and especially after I went in the service, that just kind of went away because you could see things for what they really were. But beyond that, I moved to southern Georgia, where my ex-wife is from, and I saw how that is propagated. All those little white kids have that pounded into their heads from the time they come out of the womb. You know, the first thing all my brother-in-laws did was take me down to the pool hall to shoot pool. And the first thing everybody did when they all got in the pool hall room was compare who had the earliest date on their KKK cards.
Seriously?
Right? Seriously. Blew my mind. You know, I started, what did I do? Well, you know, I started reading, you ever read The Third Eye?
No.
By Lob Singh Rampa, really good book.
Oh, Lob Singh Rampa, yeah. I read it when I was 18 years old. I mean, yeah.
He put out a lot of books that were really interesting, but that and Carlos Castaneda's stuff kind of made me start questioning everything I thought, you know. So you had to address all this stuff if you're going to be real about it. Yeah. But then another thing, my father-in-law, he had probably half a dozen black guys over. You know, in the Deep South, a lot of people go home for lunch and you take an hour and a half. So, you know, you have a big lunch and a small supper. Right. And so anyway, we're sitting around eating lunch, and there's probably half a dozen black guys that brought a bunch of firewood to my father-in-law's house, or my ex-father-in-law's house. And, you know, they're stacking it all up nice and neat, and my mother-in-law's fed them lunch and stuff, and she's headed out the door with a big pitcher of that sweet tea they drink in the South. And my father-in-law says, you know, just nasty, where are you going with that? And she said, well, I'm going to go give some to the guys outside.
Please watch your language here, Joe.
Pardon me?
Please watch your language here. Continue.
What did I say?
No, you haven't. I was concerned. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, no, man. Yeah, I know. I'm fairly proficient at the F word, so I'm really trying to hang on to it.
Yeah, we got about 40 seconds.
So she was headed out with iced tea for those guys, and of course they couldn't eat inside the house. They ate outside in the yard. And she said, "Well, I'm taking it out to those guys." And he said, "Those damn," and then the N word, don't need tea. You let them drink water. Yeah. You know, I don't know how we get people to stop and take a reality check to get out of this. It's just so, it's almost like it's in their DNA. It's been pounded into them for so long, and I don't know how you go around that. And then the cops, you know, I mean, geez, I had a girlfriend in high school that her brother-in-law was a Tucson cop. I grew up in Tucson, and we went to a wedding reception, and all his cop buddies and stuff were around, and his brother was around, and they started telling a story about a black guy they found hanging dead in a tree that had been skinned. They thought it was just funny as hell.
Jeez. Joe, thank you for sharing the stories with us. I've got a few of my own I'll share after the next hour. Thank you. We'll be back. Victoria Jones will be with us in just a second. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. On the line with us is Victoria Jones. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, a new book by Ellen Ratner. Victoria, welcome.
Thank you very much, Tom.
So, question.
Yeah.
I have the New York Times story, a couple of stories about Donald Trump finally coming out and saying, you know, basically we repudiate the Klan and the Nazis. But I didn't see the word terrorism in there anywhere. If a Muslim man had driven, or woman for that matter, had driven a car into a group of non-Muslims and killed, a young white woman, or anybody, frankly,
Donald Trump would be, saying terrorism so fast he'd be stuttering. But was the word terrorism in there and I just missed it? Or is the White House still refusing to call this an act of domestic terrorism?
Well, two things. One is that I was partially on the air with the station at the time, so I didn't hear all of the remarks. I heard the second half of the remarks. So I have some of it that I heard and some of it I have in print. So I'm waiting for the transcript of the remarks. But the other piece is that because there is a civil rights investigation going on, and because there is a legal definition of domestic terrorism, they may not have yet determined whether they're going to define it as that. And so he may have been looking at this from a fair point of view, he may have been advised to be circumspect because they don't know yet whether they are going to investigate this as domestic terrorism.
But he could have said, this looks to me like, or this stinks of, or, he's never been reluctant to call out terrorism in the past.
No, he hasn't. I know he has not, and he did not today.
I think this is I agree with you. This was carefully calibrated. I think it was carefully calibrated not to offend his base. I mean, the Stormfront guys are already, for 3 days they've been praising him for not calling, essentially not calling them out. And this just seems so damn lukewarm to me. Anyhow, back to you, Victoria.
So I was just going to talk about the statement a little bit, and that how it did talk about how racism is evil, and those who cause violence in his name are criminals and thugs, and he named KKK, neo-Nazis, white supremacists, and other hate groups that are repugnant to everything we hold dear as Americans. And anyway, it went on, and so that's that. Meantime, Virginia judge denied bail to the man accused of ramming the crowd, killing Heather Heyer, the 32-year-old woman. He was denied bail. He was assigned a court-appointed attorney. So that happened. Also today, the chief executive of Merck Pharmaceuticals, who is African American, he resigned, and I'm looking for his name in my story, and now I can't find it, which is very embarrassing.
That's quite all right.
Kenneth Frazier,
CEO
of Merck, he said in a tweet that he was resigning from Trump's American Manufacturing Council, saying he was doing so as a matter of personal conscience. Now, this is before Trump's remarks early this afternoon, and that America's leaders must honor our fundamental values by clearly rejecting expressions of hatred, bigotry, and group supremacy. About an hour later, Trump basically attacked him on Twitter, saying that didn't reference why he had resigned, but saying that now he's resigned, perhaps he can deal with drug prices, but he put it more bluntly than that, and he put it in capital letters.
Right. What's interesting is that Merck's stock price started going up right after this guy said this, and that says to me that even the guys on Wall Street are over Donald Trump.
I think a lot of people feel strongly about this.
And this is the thing that I pointed out a couple of weeks ago. People keep calling and saying, when are they going to impeach Donald Trump? And I'm like, it's going to require Republicans to impeach Trump, just like it took Republicans to threaten to impeach Nixon. They got Nixon to resign. And I don't think he'll be impeached. I think he'll resign. But that's not going to happen until there's a tipping point in the Republican Party. And I think this is getting us another step close between this and his rhetoric about North Korea. And although, the warmongers are very excited and enthusiastic about it. But, I think we're getting closer. Anyhow, I'm pontificating. Back to the news here, Victoria.
Right. The FBI has arrested Jerry Drake Varnell, an Oklahoma man, on charges that he tried to detonate what he thought was a 1,000-pound bomb outside a bank in Oklahoma City, acting out of hatred for the U.S. government and an admiration for Oklahoma City bomber Timothy McVeigh. This was on Friday night. It was a fake bomb, packed into what he believed was a stolen cargo van outside this bank, according to a criminal complaint. Now, it was a month-long undercover investigation by the FBI. He made repeated statements about the extent of his hatred of the federal government. In one conversation, he said he believed in the 3%er ideology.
Which is?
They incorrectly believe that only 3% of the colonial population participated in the American Revolution. They see themselves as their heirs, and they pledge resistance against the United States government on the belief that it is infringed on the Constitution.
Oh, that's bizarre.
Yeah. Okay, so the Sierra Club, the environmental group, sued the Energy Department today in hopes of forcing it to reveal the groups it's consulted in conducting an eagerly awaited study on the electricity grid.
Okay.
Now, the reason is Rick Perry, the Energy Secretary, who commissioned this 2-month study in April, ordered the department to see whether regulatory burdens by other administrations, including President Obama's, had forced the premature retirements of so-called baseload power plants fired by nuclear and coal. And he said those policies potentially put at risk the reliability and security of the power grid. And the Sierra Club said that, first of all, they'd ignored a Freedom of Information Act request. They wanted communications because they believed that the Energy Department had mostly relied on fossil fuel backers.
Right.
The draft of the study, which has been leaked, was written by career staff and said that intermittent renewable power has not harmed the grid. But an Energy Department spokeswoman said that the draft was outdated and had not been reviewed by political or career staff, leading the Sierra Club and others to believe the final draft could favor coal and nuclear. Right. A lot of lawmakers are upset about this, including Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, who is concerned that the secretary had commissioned a study that appeared, quote, geared to undermine the wind energy industry.
Right, and we should note that Iowa and Texas are which is kind of ironic because this is Rick Perry, but Iowa and Texas are the two states that generate the most wind power in the United States. About 10 or 20% of their electricity, I think it's 20% in both states, is generated by wind, is it not?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Texas measures to restrict access for transgender people to bathrooms in school and public buildings appear doomed.
Good.
This week, after hundreds of businesses stood in opposition and moderate Republican power brokers blocked the bills. And they've only got a couple more days in this 30-day special session, which wraps up on Wednesday.
Is this hurting or helping Greg Abbott politically in Texas? He's in favor of the bill, the governor.
He's in favor of the bill, so I don't think it's helping him.
I'm wondering, there's a whole lot, I'm going down as a martyr.
Well, that's possible.
Yeah.
Companies like Apple, IBM, ExxonMobil, and Halliburton are opposing the bill. President Trump is in Washington, D.C. today to sign an executive action asking his trade representative to investigate whether to investigate China's trade practices.
Right. This is actually a withdrawal. He should be asking him to investigate their practices, but he decided to ask them to investigate the investigation because of North Korea, right?
Well, he's not saying that, but China is indicating it could be. The official China Daily said that given Trump's transactional approach to foreign affairs, it's impossible to look at the matter without taking into account his increasing disappointment, etc., etc. They're not happy.
That's very interesting. Victoria Jones with Talk Media News. Victoria, you are so good. Thank you so much for the news today.
Thank you very much.
Great talking. We'll be back. Dr. Randy Blazik, I believe it is going to be with us right after the break. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.
Welcome to the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Our book today is Walking Your Blues Away, How to Heal the Mind and Create Emotional Well-Being. And we're reading starting on page 2 in the introduction. The human body is a self-healing organism. When you cut your finger, it heals. If you break your leg, it heals. Even if part of you is cut out in surgery, the surgeon's wound heals. We heal from bacterial and viral invasions, from injuries, from all variety of traumas. The mechanisms of healing are built into us. 5 million years of evolution or the grace of God or both have made our bodies automatic healing machines. So why wouldn't the same be true of our minds and our emotions? All of the traumas that we experience in life leave their wounds. If humankind hadn't had ways of healing from those emotional and psychological blows, over time society would have become progressively less functional. Instead, history shows us that people usually recover from even the most severe psychological wounds, often learning great lessons or gaining important insights in the recovery process. The famous Hawaii longitudinal study of children raised in stressful, disadvantaged conditions, they were migrant farm workers, found that a higher percentage of the children grew up to be highly resilient than did a middle-class control group. The generation that survived the Great Depression and the Nazi Holocaust in Europe went on to create important social institutions, build nations, and offer comfort and hope to humankind. Elie Wiesel's experience specifically comes to mind, although he never would have wished on another the horrific experience of being in one of Hitler's death camps. Through his writing of that experience, he has given a particularly inspiring model of resilience and healing to the world. The reality is that although adversity breaks some people, it strengthens others. And when people heal from adversity, the old cliche of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger usually rings true. But just as with the production of scar tissue in the healing of a wound to the skin, a process involving millions of cells producing very specific compounds in response to the trauma in the tissue, there must be an inborn mechanism for healing the mind and the emotions. And just as healing from a cut can be speeded up by keeping the wound dry, or can be slowed down by letting the wound get wet or dirty and irritated, this emotional healing is also a process that can be either stimulated or thwarted by our interventions. In this book, I've identified a specific healing mechanism and process that nature has built into the human mind and body that enables us to process trauma in a way that is quick, functional, and permanent. Just like the skin's mechanism for forming scabs and scars and eventually even making the scars vanish, this mechanism is simple, fundamental, and elegant. In its simplest form, this mechanism involves rhythmic side-to-side stimulation of the body. The side-to-side motion, or bilateral motion, causes nerve impulses to cross the brain from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere and back at a specific rate or frequency. This cross-patterning produces an organic integration of left hemispheric thinking functions with right hemisphere and brainstem feeling functions. This integration is a necessary precursor to emotional and intellectual healing from trauma. This steady movement of nerve impulses across the hemispheres of the brain is stimulated by the bilateral movement processes of a variety of modern forms of psychotherapy, such as eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, also known as EMDR, emotional freedom technique, and thought field therapy. In its purest form, however, I've discovered that the natural and rhythmic left-right process of walking while performing a simple mental exercise can also stimulate the same internal integration process. This, I posit, is the way humans have healed themselves for trauma for the hundreds of thousands of years of human history. And it's only because so few of us walk anymore that we have to resort to office-based psychotherapeutic processes to produce a similar result. And that result is impressive. When we stimulate the nervous system in this bilateral manner while calling to mind a persistent emotional distress, the emotional charge associated with that memory quickly and permanently dissipates. This isn't a process of producing amnesia or forgetting. Instead, it's a way of reframing the past, a way of re-understanding or putting into context what has been so unnerving to us. When we perform this bilateral process correctly, the pictures of painful past events in our memory transforms from stark, scary, sound-filled color movies into black and white still pictures that are flattened out and lose their sound. The internal dialogue we have about the events, the tagline that we tell ourselves, and actually hear in our own heads and in our own voices, changes. Usually from something like, that was a painful experience that still scares me, or I was victimized in that relationship, to a more productive synopsis, such as, yes, that happened to me, but it's well in the past now, and I've learned some good lessons from the experience. I can now let go of it. Inciting the movement of nerve impulses across the brain's hemispheres helps people come to terms with their past. They stop being frightened by their imagined futures and feel comfortable and empowered in the present. Walking while holding a traumatic memory in mind in a particular way can produce this result in a very short time. And the book goes on to talk about how exactly to use simple walking, just going out for a 20-minute walk, which is physically good for you. Use that simple walking and combine it with a very specific set of mental exercises that Sigmund Freud and Franz Anton Mesmer and others first discovered years ago. Walking your blues away.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with me is Dr. Randy Blazak. He is a professor of sociology on the faculty at the University of Oregon, the chair of the Oregon Coalition Against Hate Crimes. OregonCAHC.org is that website. His Twitter handle is rblazak, B-L-A-Z-A-K. Dr. Blazak, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's good to be on it. I've long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, thank you. It's great to have you with us. I was reading your piece from literally 2 years ago, from 2015. You point out that you got your PhD from Emory University in '95 after studying several years of ethnographic field studies of white supremacist groups. You're widely published in this area. You're one of the world's leading experts, I would say, or at least the country's leading experts on white supremacists. And in 2015, the title of your piece, you're a prophet, was Donald Trump is the new face of white supremacy. Do you still feel that way?
Yeah, I think it's a little surprising, I think, to many of us how quickly this all came about. But when I first was listening to his speeches when he announced he was running and his first sort of discussion about building the wall and, global warming as a Chinese hoax, it just sounded so much like the rhetoric that I would hear at Klan rallies while I was doing my research, or the things that skinheads would say about the world. And it was almost cribbed word for word in terms of the blaming of the victim, or these conspiracy theories, or the white man is on the way out and we have to bring America back. This whole Make America Great Again thing is this push back to this mythical past of the straight white male when he was unchallenged by civil rights legislation and Whoopi Goldberg. So the pace at which that has accelerated is frightening, because I think 2 years ago a lot of us thought he was just going to be, a kind of side note of our political history and end up with a good TV show out of it. And in fact, now he's in the White House, and the frightening part is that the people who knew that rhetoric and were listening to him are now spilling into the streets, and we're seeing the end result of all that type of talk now in Charlottesville and in Seattle and all around the country, including here in Portland.
What are the dimensions of the Klan / Nazi / more generic white supremacist groups and individuals, for that matter? What are the dimensions of this in the United States?
It's always something that's hard to measure. Even when the Klan was an organized group that had a set membership, and you would have people who are literally card-carrying members of the Klan, it was hard to tell because there's the shadow membership that's involved. And so one of the things that's happened over the last 20 years, and really the last 10 years, has been these groups have moved online, so you don't have to be a formal member of a group. Dylan Roof, the Charleston shooter, was never a member of a formal group. And so it's hard to gauge. And so in a weird way, the stuff that's been happening over the last year with the alt-right has been useful because instead of being on these websites on Reddit and 4chan, they're now out, and we can actually count them, and they're marching with their torches, and we can take their pictures. So you get a little bit of a better idea of the scope of it, but it's still really hard to measure. We do know from public attitude surveys that there is a sort of a consistent 20% of people who are fellow travelers with this ideology.
Of white people.
Of white people who believe that sort of their picture of America is in jeopardy and are opposed to civil rights laws, that are opposed to gay rights. And so that's the sort of constant thing. The question is how much you can fan the people who are on the margins of that.
Right. We had John Dean on. John Dean's been on this program many times. He wrote a book called Conservatives Without a Conscience that was based on a previous book by another author called The Authoritarians. And he posited that about 20% of the population has authoritarian tendencies, most of them authoritarian followers as opposed to authoritarian leaders. And the followers are looking for an authoritarian leader. Is there a lot of overlap between those two 20%?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think what we see, and this is based not only on my research, but the research of others, that there are people that have a hard time managing all the change that's happening in this country. I mean, if we think about the last 50 years and even the last 10 years, there's a huge demographic change. There's a huge change with regards to gender and sexual identity. There's a huge economic change. You know, people are working at Walmart instead of General Motors. I mean, all this change has been happening fairly quickly. And so the people who are going to be able to explain that change to those people who feel sort of left out by it and alienated by it are going to win the day. And if it was, 1968, it might have been Students for Democratic Society or somebody like that. But, for the last 20 years, the right wing has had the analysis that it's globalization, and then a little bit darker, it's this conspiracy theory, and a little bit darker from that, it's this conspiracy theory about a global Jewish elite that wants to displace white Christian men with feminism and homosexuality and hip-hop music, all these other tropes that are hauled out to show that the white man isn't in power anymore. And so that's the thing that pulls those people in who are authoritarian following, who are looking for an analysis, that's step one, and then are looking for what to do about it, that's step two. And so these alt-right demonstrations are part of step two.
Right. So I'm interested in solutions. If I could very quickly tell you a couple of stories out of my own life about about white people waking up to race. My father grew up in Newego, Michigan, pretty much all-white rural town in northern Michigan, mostly a Norwegian community. His father and mother were Norwegian immigrants. And as a kid, I used to spend summers up there and with my cousins. My cousins weren't particularly racist, but some of the people that they hung out with were, this was where some of my earliest memories of white people using the N-word just liberally came from there. My father grew up in that. He went off to World War II, to the Japanese, and when he, to the occupation, where he served with black people. It was probably the first time in his life he'd ever encountered black people. And when any of my friends would say anything that would be marginally racist, my father would come down on them like a ton of bricks. The white girl who lived next door to us wanted to marry a black man. Her parents literally disowned her, and my father walked her down the aisle in that wedding. He became the most, it just flipped him upside down. My wife went through, back in the 60s in East Lansing, Michigan, through these black awareness classes and read Cry the Beloved Country and the autobiography of Malcolm X and whatnot. It seems like these are waking up experiences for white people. How do we more broadly generalize this? How do we get out of this? Where do we go from here?
Well, part of it is exactly what you're talking about, which is dealing with the issue of ignorance. Ignorant people aren't bad or evil. They're just uneducated. I mean, my grandmother never met a Muslim that she knew about and said some horrible things after 9/11. And I said, Grandma, come with me and let's talk to a Muslim. And it changed her whole view just by having that first-person contact. So in a similar story that you're telling, a lot of it is breaking out of our bubbles and meeting people, meeting refugees and meeting gay people and, getting to know people as human beings as opposed to stereotypes or memes on Facebook. So that's the first step. The second step is giving people the tools to handle all this change, to understand it, so they don't immediately go into the sort of simplistic black and white world that we're, being attacked. I mean, these guys literally that were marching in Virginia were saying, the white man is losing America. And if you don't understand the history of America in terms of the patchwork of cultures and immigrant groups and all the people that have participated in America, including the slaves, that is a very resonant claim that, somehow this picture of history that I've been taught is going away. And if I don't do something now, it's going to be unrecognizable. Well, that person needs to be educated a little bit on the history as well and given some skills by which to manage that change. And so that's a lot of the work we do through the coalition. It's trying to find resources. There's an amazing group now of former white supremacists, people who used to be members of skinhead groups and Klan groups. They're called Life After Hate. And they do amazing work de-radicalizing other right-wing extremists by talking about how they fell into it, the thinking errors they made, the behavioral errors they made, and how their life is better now that they got out of it. They're a wonderful resource. We're using them in the Islamic world in Europe, and we're starting to use them in the white supremacist.
What's the name of that group? I'd love to get somebody on the show as a guest.
Yeah, there's some great folks. They're called Life After Hate.
Okay, cool. We'll check it out.
They can really provide a testimony about the appeal of that world, especially to young men, and what it took to get out of it, and the incredible perspective and insight that you have once you're on the outside looking back inward at it.
Do you think that having a...
And can I just say, they were given a $400,000 grant by the Obama administration in January that was rescinded by the Trump administration last month. So I just want to throw that in.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
Yeah, so they're worth seeking out and supporting because they really need help to do the work that they're doing.
That's obscene.
Yeah.
Wow. Do you think that having a president who has, as you referred to him 2 years ago, the Nazi dream date, who's apparently a white nationalist, certainly has surrounded himself with at least 3 prominent ones in the White House. And even today, when they finally, after 3 days, came out with a carefully scripted paragraph condemning Nazis, never used the word terrorism or white terrorism, and certainly would never say white Christian terrorism. This is the guy who for 8 years was screaming that Obama would not say radical Islamic terrorism. Do you think that that is helping or hurting? Obviously the white nationalists, these Nazis, they think that they've got their guy in the White House. But for the broader dialogue, is this helping wake up America, or is this throwing us back? Is this like a new version of Birth of a Nation?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the work that I do with the white supremacists, just spending time in their chat rooms and their discussion forums, they know that sometimes he has to sort of play to the political mainstream and, say Happy Hanukkah in December or something like that. But he is speaking their language. He's carrying their cause. I mean, I don't know what's in Trump's mind or heart. He just seems kind of dumb to me. Like he doesn't really know what's happening. But that group definitely sees him as their last best chance. The wider population, including a lot of the people that voted for him, also are angry about affirmative action. They're angry about civil rights. They're angry about immigration. And they don't have essentially the tools to make sense of what's going on, because the only people that's explaining to them are these folks on the right who say, it's the illegal immigrant who wants to rape your daughter. That's the problem. So it's easy in that sense to pull those people over to this extremist side. And what we're seeing, and I think you are probably one of the best voices on this, is that the dialogue, the political discourse is just inching farther and farther to the right, to a point where, John McCain is now a liberal, and the fascists are now sort of have a stake in mainstream political discourse.
Dr. Blazek, we're out of time, but thank you. So hang on just a second.
is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Dr. Randy Blazek, sociology professor at University of Oregon, cahc.org. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
And welcome back. Let's see here. Tripper in Decatur, Georgia. Hey, Tripper, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Wow, great caller so far and guests and everything.
Yeah.
And I can actually even tie in to my original thought and your last caller when you mentioned the press release of that Trump gave, the carefully worded one. And it's kind of like that ... and other hate groups. And I'm sure they would have loved to include like Antifa into that.
Right.
And they, I feel like, are working to, when I say they, I mean the white nationalist groups. I feel like they are trying to work in this victimhood where it's like, we have a right to be out here too, and look at these anti-fascists, they're out here and they're already wearing gear, and what are they wearing gear if they're not here for a fight? And it's because the anti-fascists know that there's always a good chance that, you know, it's going to get violent with these guys, you know, like the guy
Sure.
holding and walking around with a gun in his hand, and obviously the horrific, you know, driving into a crowd. But I think that that's what they're really trying to gain, is like what they want to try and gain this fervor, and especially, you know, just people who support regular Republicans, you know, they're all kind of tied into this because I see the conversations where they support ideas of like, well, if you're in the road, you know, and you get run over, that's your fault, or blah, blah, blah. And there's even people more extreme than that who are like, well, if people are on the road, I'm just going to run them over because, you know, they're making laws now that, you know, give me the right to do that. And they really think that stuff.
Yep.
And it goes into the whole argument about, you know, the immigration thing, how you know, the first thing you hear them say is, oh, well, I pay my taxes. Why aren't they paying their taxes? And they shouldn't be here. And it's like they don't even realize that they're probably paying more in taxes than you are. And, you know, it just buys into that, the whole bootstrap argument. And I really feel like it's just all tied together into that. And I think there might be a little bit of a wake up for some who look at it, what happened yesterday, and say, you know what, I really don't want to be a part of that. But at the same time, I feel like Trump, again, was giving out dog whistles, letting people know, hey, you know what, we're still calling this two sides. You know, with this, you know, they really didn't call anything out. I mean, it was a miracle that he even said, you know, white nationalist groups and.
Oh, it wasn't a miracle. It was the pressure built up to the point where he had no choice. I mean, CNN was particularly good on this over the weekend. I was surprised how weak MSNBC was on it, just constantly hammering the fact that Trump was refusing to explicitly call out these white supremacists and these Nazis. I think even white nationalists and white supremacists, you know, whitewashes it to a certain extent. Let's just call them Nazis and Klan members. That's what they are. That's what they're you know, proudly embracing. I realize not all of them are members of specific organizations, but they're fellow travelers.
Yeah, and let's not forget that where these anti-protest laws are coming from, because all these anti-protest laws started coming out when black people started standing up for their rights.
And Native Americans with Dakota Access.
Yeah, and that's pretty much all I had for you. I just wanted to point that out because that was filled with dog whistles, and I would love for you to more dissect it when you get a chance and really.
What was filled with dog whistles?
Yeah.
Tripper, what was filled with dog whistles?
The press release.
Oh, this morning?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I have, you know, all I have is the paragraph right now. I've got to say what? Yeah, I've got, what did you see as a dog whistle in there, Tripper?
Oh, well, I did mention it before, like just the part where, you know, he was saying, he mentions the hate groups, and then like it was kind of like ... and other hate groups.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
That's what I was saying.
Yeah. Tripper, we're out of time, but thank you. Well said. We'll be back. Stick around.
Hi, I'm Valerie with Free Speech TV. We're proud to provide you with independent, unfiltered news and documentaries. And as our valued viewer, you can help us continue bringing Free Speech TV well into the future. Join our Pearly Gate Rebels, our planned giving program. Your gift of any size will help ensure democracy endures through an informed citizenry. You can donate property, money, or assets. It's easy. My spouse and I are proud Pearly Gate rebels. We're doing our part to ensure that Free Speech TV will be here to deliver thought-provoking news and information well into the future. Join us. Call 877-378-8669 or email me at valerie@freespeech.org. Rebel against media owned by billionaires and become one of our Pearly Gate rebels today.
Welcome back. Let's see here. Michael in Bronx, New York. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Hey, Tom, what's up, good buddy? You know something? When it comes to what happened in Charlottesville, let's not forget one key thing, and that is going back to the campaign. We saw and heard Trump's rhetoric. We saw and heard who he put the targets on: Mexicans, people of color, Muslims. And who was at his rally? Pretty much the white nationalists. And he says to them, and don't worry about any legal votes. I'll take care of it all. I'll take care of all of you and all that stuff. That has been carrying even to this very day. So what people got to understand is that there's a precedent set that a certain group has been given the green light and free pass to terrorize and attack anyone that they want. And we already know who the targets are. And they will never, ever face any kind of criminal accountability. That in itself is dangerous, led by the person who took an oath to protect all Americans and to go by the law and the Constitution. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do. And in fact, I've been thinking that maybe we should even start referring to what happened in Charlotte on Saturday as a race riot, which historically has been a term used for black people protesting, but this is white people provoking. This is and it's all about race. It's all about, hey, white people own this country, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, I'm with you, Michael. Very well said. Thank you. Dave in Huffman Estates, Illinois. Hey, Dave, what's up?
Hey, Tom. A couple of quick questions. The first one I haven't heard is the family of this Heather Hare, the parents or whatever, are they going to sue that police department?
I don't know.
Because I understand they did such a horrible job, keeping them apart at first. But
yeah, that all those details will come out right now. I don't know.
Yeah. On the other thing, your guest, I believe, Mark Potak, in that, was it, if I'm correct, earlier?
Mark Potak was our guest at the top of the first hour of the show.
Yeah, and he's talking about, like, with the statues and stuff like that. And that good or bad, it's history to me, because it's like...
No, the statue isn't history. Those statues were not put up during the Civil War. Those statues were put up 60, 70 years after the Civil War, after Birth of a Nation gave birth to the Klan, the modern-day Klan, in the 19-teens. In the 1920s, there was a big movement across the United States to revive the Klan and revive the mythology of the Confederacy. And a lot of money and time was spent in building these statues all over the country to these Confederate, quote, heroes, end quote. I would call them traitors. So, let's keep this in perspective. Dave, thank you for the call, and thanks for listening. We'll be back. It's coming up on 28 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's our national conversation about white supremacy, hate, Trump, what it all means. Where do we go? What do we do? Hi, for the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading from The Crash of 2016, which might happen in early 2017. We'll see, but it's coming. This is from Chapter 5. Chapter 5 is titled Reagan Kidnapped the Jetsons. In a 1966 article, Time magazine looked toward the future and what the rise of automation would mean for average working Americans. It concluded, quote, by 2000, the machines will be producing so much that everyone in the U.S. will, in effect, be independently wealthy.
With government benefits, even non-working families will have, by one estimate, an annual income of $30,000 to $40,000. How to use leisure meaningfully will be a major problem. End of quote. And that was $30,000 to $40,000 in 1966 dollars, which would roughly be $199,000 to $260,000 in 2010 dollars. Ask anybody who was a teenager or older in the 1960s. This was a big sales pitch for automation and the coming computer age. There was even a cartoon show about it, The Jetsons. And everybody looked forward to the day when increased productivity from robots, computers, and automation would translate into fewer hours worked or more pay or both for every American worker. And there was good logic behind the idea. The premise was simple. With better technology, companies would become more efficient. They'd be able to make more things in less time. Revenues would skyrocket, and Americans would bring home higher and higher paychecks, all the while working fewer and fewer hours. So by the year 2000, according to Time magazine in 1966, we would enter what was then referred to as the leisure society. Futurists speculated that the biggest problem facing America in that Jetsons future of the year 2000 would be just how the heck everyone would use all their extra leisure time. And of course, there were also those who worried about what kind of degeneracy would emerge when a nation has lots of money and free time on its hands. Neither happened, and it didn't happen because Ronald Reagan stole the leisure society from us and handed it over to the economic royalists. In 1981, the royalists went right to work, taking down that first pillar on which FDR rebuilt the American middle class, progressive taxation. Taking advantage of the oil shock crisis, neoliberal shock troopers immediately ushered through a revolutionary change in the tax code with the Economic Recovery Act of 1981. The first major piece of legislation signed by Reagan is slashed the top marginal income tax rate from 70% to 50%, cutting estate taxes for wealthy businesses and slashing capital gains and corporate profit taxes. Reagan succeeded a few years later in dropping the top income tax rate even more to 28%, where it hadn't been since the Great Depression. It was the second largest tax cut in history, and it was nearly identical to the largest tax cut ever. Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon's in the 1920s, the one that created the bubble known as the Roaring Twenties, which eventually burst in 1929. The great forgetting had certainly arrived. The economic mistakes of the 1920s were coming back around. And again, the influx of all this hot money in the market, coupled with a robust deregulation agenda throughout the 1980s and 90s, would trigger a series of painful financial panics. The reason why the leisure society could be imagined by Time magazine is because ever since 1900, working people's wages tracked evenly with working people's productivity. So as productivity continued to rise, which was likely due to increased automation and better technology, so too would everyone's wages. And the glue holding this logic together was the current top marginal income tax rate. In 1966, when the Time article was written, the top marginal income tax rate was 70%. And what that effectively did was encourage CEOs to keep more money in their businesses and invest in new technology to pay their workers more, to hire new workers and expand. After all, what's the point of sucking millions and millions of dollars out of your business if it's going to be taxed at 70%? According to this line of reasoning, if businesses were to suddenly become more profitable and efficient thanks to automation, then that money would flow throughout the businesses, raising everyone's standard of living, increasing everyone's leisure time. But when Reagan dropped that top tax rate down to 28%, everything changed, as you can see in this graph. Now, as businesses became more profitable, there was a far greater incentive for CEOs to pull those profits out of the company and pocket them because they were suddenly paying an incredibly low tax rate. And that's exactly what they did. All those new profits, thanks to automation, that were supposed to go to everyone, giving us all higher paychecks and more time off, instead went to the top, to the economic royalists. Suddenly, the symmetry in the productivity wages chart broke down. Productivity continued increasing because technology continued improving, but wages stayed flat. And again, since higher and higher profits could be sucked out of the company and taxed at lower and lower levels, there was no incentive to reduce the number of hours everyone worked. In the 1950s, before that Time magazine article predicted the leisure society, before that article was written, the average American working in manufacturing put in about 42 hours of work a week. Today, the average American working in manufacturing puts in about 40 hours a week. This means that despite the fact that productivity has increased 400% since 1950, Americans are working on average only 2 fewer hours a week. If productivity is 4 times higher than in 1950, that Americans should be able to work 4 times less, or just 10 hours a week, to afford the same 1950s lifestyle when a family of 4 could get by on just one paycheck, own a home, own a car, put their kids through school, take a vacation every now and then, and retire comfortably. But all that was wiped out by Reaganomics and Ronald Reagan. And that's just the beginning of the setup for the crash of 2016.
Hey, want to hear that clip again? Subscribe to the Thom Hartmann Program on YouTube to see all your favorite show highlights.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. This is remarkable. I was just checking out the website that Dr. Oh, I've lost my paper. Blazak. Thank you, Troy. Dr. Blazak was telling us about, and what a great guy who really knows his topic. And TPM has a story. A father denounces son identified as participant in white supremacist rally. This kid's picture was distributed in the news. He was out there shouting hate, and his father came out and he said, "My name is Pierce Teft, and I am writing to all with regards to my youngest son, Peter Teft, an avowed white nationalist who's been featured in a number of local news stories over the last several months." He wrote this in a letter to the North Dakota, Minnesota news site Inforum. He said, "My son did not learn white nationalist rhetoric at home." And he said, "We have been silent up until now. We now see this was a mistake. It was the silence of good people that allowed the Nazis to flourish the first time around, and it is the silence of good people that is allowing them to flourish now. Peter Teft, my son, is not welcome at our family gatherings any longer. His hateful opinions are bringing hateful rhetoric to his siblings, cousins, nieces, and nephews, as well as his parents. He once joked," this is dad talking about his son, who was one of the fascists at the rally this weekend. He once joked, "The thing about us fascists is, it's not that we don't believe in freedom of speech. You can say whatever you want. We'll just throw you in the oven." Pierce Teft said, his son had said to him. "Peter, you will," and then his father says, Peter, to his son Peter, he says, "Peter, you will have to shovel our bodies into the oven too." Peter Teft on Friday posted a photograph of himself in the Confederate monument in Charlottesville. He says, "Nazi is a racial slur against whites." Right. In a Facebook post on Monday, Peter Teft defended the driver who killed this woman. "Fatal crashes happen all the time, and it's clear that this young man's car was being attacked on all sides by a roving mob of Antifa when he slammed the gas pedal and right. Don't even. Right. Pathetic. I don't know how to describe it beyond that. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's up?
Thanks for taking my call, Tom, and thanks for all that you and Louise and your staff do. You're our guiding light and our gathering point.
Thank you, George. What's on your mind today?
Two quick points. I'll make them say as I can. First, I'm the son.
George, I'm going to have to put you on hold for a minute, and Louise can figure this out because your phone is breaking up terribly, and I can't understand what you're saying. Let's see if we can clean it up, maybe at the stand in a different part of the house or something. He's on line 8, Louise, if you want to pick him up. Fred in Bremerton, Washington. Hey, Fred, what's on your mind?
Oh, a lot of things. First time caller, Tom. I've been listening to your program for quite a long time. I'm scared. I'm really scared. If I ran the flag up the flagpole, I'd put it on upside down. I am in my 60s. I'm retired. I did 10 years in the United States Navy, 2 tours in Vietnam. My father drove a tank for Patton. Both my brothers are in the military. My grandfather fought Indians during the Indian Wars. So I've got some heritage going way back in this country. But I'm Mesoamerican. Mesoamerican. My ancestors built the first chain of restaurant hotels on the West Coast back when the white guy was learning how to eat with a fork. And so to have these people in Charlottesville twist the law, twist the Bible, twist it so it fits their needs. I'm okay. Short story long. I've lived in the South. I've lived in Mobile, Alabama. I had a house in Stone Mountain, Georgia. I've lived in Texas. I've lived in Louisiana. I've lived in Arkansas. I'm sorry to say there's an ignorance level that permeates down there. I saw the young boy, the black kid in Pritchard, Alabama, that was hung because he was dating a white girl, and the white girl happened to be the daughter of some Klan member, and so they had to prove to them that they were, omnipotent. So they had to hang this kid, and that's when Oprah went down to Forsyth County.
Yeah.
She wanted to get that thing straightened out, and then it's you got the tape of it. Her standing there with the microphone. Now, big bulbous, fat-bellied white guy comes out and calls her the N-word.
Wow.
I mean, there's some real bigotry going on in this country, and it's being perpetuated by that orange guy in the White House.
Yep.
He's nothing more than a comb-over. He's got a lot of money. I would bet dollars to donuts that if they dug deep enough, they'd find that over the years that he's made all his money, somehow he's in cahoots with the Russians. Because when Perestroika went down, that wall came down, there was more garbage going on between those two countries and our two countries than you can shake a stick at.
Yeah, it may be. I think what we're going to find out, and whether he's been borrowing money from Russian oligarchs or from Deutsche Bank, I think what we're going to find out is that he's actually in debt more, that Donald Trump is broke. I could be wrong. He won't release his tax returns, so we don't know. But I think it's entirely possible. I don't see why he would be fighting so hard to hang on to the hotel in Washington, D.C., for example, just to make a few $1 million a quarter, unless he was just, desperate for money. But I could be wrong. Some people just, have this hoarding thing around money, and that could be it. Fred, thank you for the call, and thanks for sharing your story with us. Alexis in Terabella, California. Hey, Alexis, what's up?
Hey, what's up, Tom? How you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Great. I just want to tell everybody that's listening, don't be afraid. There's nothing we can do, really. We all know the truth.
I think there's a lot we can do, and it starts with speaking out.
Yeah. You're free to speak out and share with everybody what you think. But why hate? There's no need for hate.
Yeah. Well, hate typically comes out of fear.
Love.
Yeah. Hate. See. In order to express and experience love, you have to set aside fear, and or push through fear. And I would submit to you that fear is the principal thing that drives hate, and that the people who are the promoters of this, whether it's Donald Trump in the White House or whether it's David Duke, are first promoting fear. Fear of brown people, fear of black people, fear of Muslims, fear of the other, at a less obvious level, but still there. Fear of Jews, fear of, just fill in the blanks, right? That fear is what's driving that hate, and the way to cut through the fear, in my opinion, is A, people getting to know each other, and B, is people being educated about the realities of all of our lives and our common humanity. But I'm with you, Alexis. Very well said. Thank you for the call, Ann in Aurora, Illinois. Hey, Ann, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. How you doing today?
I'm fine. What's on your mind, Ann?
You say that good people should speak out against these hate groups, and one of your callers said that. What about we not show up? When they protest, like in Virginia, but you said that may not be an option. Now, until the laws are changed, the laws is going to be one to help us, but I'm not sure because look who's the Attorney General. So what can we do to have peaceful counter-protest? Peaceful counter-protest, because since November the death toll is going up, and it's just 6 months into his presidency of a 4-year marriage that cannot be annulled yet. What can the people do to have peaceful counter-protest? And I disagree with you when you said Donald Trump is not out to destroy America, because he's unknowingly destroying America. I would like your remarks on
Sure.
this.
I'm not sure I've ever said Donald Trump is not out to destroy America. That's a pretty big bite. But Donald Trump is certainly destroying America. He is he has already damaged our reputation around the world. He has torn us apart politically. You ask what we can do. In my opinion, this is all being driven by the Republican Party. It's why you only have a couple of, you got Marco Rubio calling out Trump, right? Saying, hey, point out this is terrorism. Why? Because Marco Rubio wants to run for president. And he hates Donald Trump. Trump called him little and, little Marco and all this kind of stuff. And it's the Republican Party. The Republican Party, since 1968, Richard Nixon started this process of using hate as a weapon. And it's, how are we doing on time, Troy? Then to a soft break. Thank you. So do you have the Lee Atwater clip? Thank you. This is 1980. Lee Atwater, the guy who in 1988 designed the Willie Horton ads to take down Michael Dukakis, who used, which was, black guy gets out of prison and rapes and murders a white girl. Oh my God. Runs it on the end. But in 1980, 8 years before, when Lee Atwater was one of the chief strategists for Ronald Reagan, he's meeting with a group of Republican activists, and he's talking about how, in the good old days, we used to use the N-word liberally. And then in the 60s, we started using the word busing because it was a little more acceptable. And then we figured out that, you could say, we just want to cut spending. And all the white people immediately understood that what that meant was, we're going to cut all those social welfare programs for all those lazy black people, right? Here's Lee Atwater in his own words.
You start out in 1954 by saying, by 1968, you can't say that hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. But I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than
Right.
So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Yeah. In other words, the Republicans don't have to be explicit in shouting out racist language. They can be implicit, and it works just fine for them. And that's exactly what Lee Atwater did. He apologized for it on his deathbed. He died of the same kind of brain cancer that John McCain has right now and that took down Teddy Kennedy. But it's, so in answer to your question, you said, what can we do about it? What you can do about it is get everybody you know registered to vote. And in 2018, get out every Democrat you possibly can. Because this evil is coming out of the Republican Party.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And the billionaires who fund the Republican Party, just fine with them as far as I can tell. As long as they get their tax cuts and their deregulation, they're happy. And welcome back. Bill, watching Free Speech TV in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Hey, Bill, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. How are you today?
I am well. What's up?
Yeah, the weekend was just absolutely horrible. But one of the things that I wanted to say, every time something like this happens, many in the white community seem to be surprised. And, of course, they trot the pundits out to try to explain this. But my point is simply, we have a background and a wealth of knowledge from Frederick Douglass to James Baldwin to Malcolm X to King, who have been trying to tell the white community this is the problem. And these are some of the things that we can do as a nation and a community to help alleviate these problems, but it seems that the white community does not want to listen.
Right.
And, you know, that's part of the problem right there. And so when this happened over the weekend, I would suggest that there were many people in the black community that were not surprised at all, because we knew that this has been there for quite some time and has been simmering under the surface. Now that we have President Trump, this has all come back up to the surface now. Yeah. These people are emboldened, and it's going to hurt us all.
I agree. And I think what it is with white people, Bill, is that it's so easy to just slip back into white privilege. It's so easy to just slip back into a largely white community, mostly white friends, largely white businesses, and just pretend that the whole racial problem is not even real. The same way that people pretend that, you know, we don't have hungry children in the United States, that we don't have, you know, I mean, there's all kinds of social ills, but this is a huge one, right? But white people have that luxury. People of color don't have that luxury, and that I frankly think that's the basis of it. Back to you.
One of the things that I think is important to note, we cannot ignore this.
Yes.
A case in point, if a woman has a malignant tumor in her breast, ignoring it is not going to make that problem go away.
Yep.
Okay? You have to address it. And the problems with race that we have in the country cannot be ignored. You can't sweep it under the rug. We have to face it head on and talk about it honestly, Tom.
Yeah. And I think in cases like what happened on Saturday, we need to use the strongest language possible. Things like, you know, white Christian supremacist terrorism. And Sue in our chat room checked. She has the whole transcript of everything Trump said today. He never once mentioned the word terrorism. And of course, the Klan calls itself a Christian organization. The Nazis were overtly Christian. Nobody is mentioning any of that. And obviously, it's a perversion of Christ's teachings, but nonetheless, it's I don't know, Bill. I don't know. It requires a giant wake up and a continual fire bell.
Well, I want to thank you for fighting the good fight. Carry on, my friend.
Thank you, Bill. Thanks for the call, and thanks for your kind words. This is, you know, we need to be talking, I'm talking about white people, need to be talking to white people about the problem that white people have with race. And we need to be blunt and honest and upfront with you about this cannot go on. This cannot go on. Welcome back. David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Thank you, Guru. If I may briefly rant, I believe that most of America's bad karma, racism, slavery, genocide of the American Indians, rape of the environment, as well as most of the existential problems facing humanity today, global warming, income inequality, poverty, they are all the result of the conservatives' worldwide abject hatred for what our founders wrote in the Constitution 2 times. Promote the general welfare. Promote, to help bring about, to further the growth or expansion of general, everyone, everywhere, welfare, health, happiness, prosperity. You can't be a racist and promote the general welfare. You can't rape the environment and promote the general welfare. The Constitution compels us 2 times to provide for the common defense and to promote the general welfare, and it's time for the conservatives to embrace this instead of hate it, and it's time for them to evolve.
Yeah. Well, that document was written by at least half the people who wrote that document owned slaves. And it's something that, these so-called Christian Nazis will tell you, and I'll tell you, but they would say, therefore, those guys really didn't mean it, right? And but I agree with your rant. I'm just not sure that I would frame it in the context of the Constitution, given the history of the Constitution. But how about common human decency, David? I mean, this is. I get your point, and I totally agree with everything you said. And I think we need to even take it beyond just the Constitution. We need to say, the principles on which this country was founded, yes, but now the principles that we have evolved to after World War II, after the Civil War, after 3 major depressions, after all the things that we've been through, we have gotten to this point, and we just can't, go backwards. David, good rant. Thank you very much. Scott in Minneapolis. Hey, Scott, what's up?
Hi. I think I have a peaceful protest tactic that might start this national conversation. And that would be when we protest the so-called alt-right, we burn the Confederate flag.
Whoa.
See who gets mad and why.
Why has nobody ever burned the Confederate flag? I have no recollection. Say what?
I don't think anybody thought of it.
Well, or they're afraid of. I mean, these are Nazis. Nazis kill people. They killed somebody on Saturday.
If you're not a Confederate, it's just a piece of cloth, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah. And there's nobody who's a Confederate, legally anymore.
We start burning that at protests, and we'll see who. I think this thing could sort out who's who.
It would be
white people and start them talking at least.
It would be interesting. I suspect. I mean, my friend Nate, who called in earlier, he's like, I don't want my last name out there because these people are serious. They will come to your house. They will take you down. They will kill you if it's and whoa. Scott, interesting. Thank you for sharing that with us. Bob in Rolling Prairie, Indiana. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I know you said that the Germans don't have any statues to Rommel, but there are the concentration camps that you can go visit, and I have an idea of what to do with our statues. We got a lot of them sitting around that we don't really need. I think they could form the a kind of a place to put. We could take the statues and ring us like an acre area around it and make our own little Dachau of the Civil War.
Yeah, so make it like the perimeter guard around the slave quarters at Monticello or at Mount Vernon.
Exactly, and have a big fence around that would make it impossible for people to get out except the front gate.
Yeah, I just learned recently. I live down on in the waterfront here in Washington D.C., and I just learned recently that one of the largest slave markets in the United States was literally a block from where I sleep every night. There is no memorial to that. There is no, I lived there 6 years and just learned this just a couple weekends ago. And, it's like maybe we should start looking at our own history and memorializing the reality of our own history. And the reality of our own history is not that the South won. Bob, excellent point. Thank you very much for the call. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow. In the meantime, don't forget democracy and a decent society, right? A decent, caring, we're all in this together society. Doesn't just spring out of the mud, fully fun. It requires all of us, which includes you. Democracy is not a spectator sport. Get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeats.com.
I'm Nina Turner, and you're watching Free Speech TV.